Chapter 1442. Defensive Strike. There was only a single core purpose to it. That was to mobilize all strength that could be used, gather it into a single point, and then explode at that point. So, without a doubt, this fist was the strongest killing power that Qin Yu could muster at this moment. His current strength was comparable to an extreme true saint, and with the support of his inherited supernatural abilities, the might of his fist could be imagined. The true saint-level dark puppet across from him was indeed formidable, but its armor of light was broken again and again in front of Qin Yu, reducing its defense to its lowest point. Naturally, there was no way for it to withstand this punch that carried with it an infinite and terrifying strength. With a heaven-shaking explosion, the dark puppet was sent flying away. The armor of light covering its body cracked apart and scattered everywhere. And at the same time, the dark puppet's body beneath it was also damaged. It was like a rampaging rhinoceros had smashed into its body. Then, it tumbled about and shattered. A true saint-level dark puppet, one that was supported by both light and darkness, was brutally destroyed by Qin Yu's unstoppable methods. Although it was as he said, the main reason was that the other party was an inanimate object that didn't know how to adapt, who could ignore the terrifying strength that Qin Yu had erupted with in this matter. But at this time, Qin Yu didn't relax at all after killing this true saint-level dark puppet. Instead, his eyebrows furrowed, even tighter, and a dignified look appeared in his eyes. The reason was simple. As the puppet was killed, black energy surged out from its body, disappearing in the blink of an eye. But disappearing didn't mean that it had dissipated. Rather, it was absorbed into the bodies of the countless dark puppets in front of him. And as this occurred, the aura that the dark puppets emitted was clearly much stronger than before. This was what caused Qin Yu to frown. His complexion was ugly, and a foreboding premonition rose in his heart. For the sake of verifying this inference, he raised his hand and swung his fist, and it was still a defensive technique. However, the dark puppet before him was far from being able to compare to the puppet he'd killed earlier. So it could only howl in despair before it was shattered into pieces by Changqi's fist that smashed down without restraint. But Qin Yu's complexion became even uglier. This was because the scene in front of him had already verified his previous guess. What he saw was a sea of torn limbs and flesh, and the black energy that came out was all absorbed by the other dark puppets. This was like a passive monster killing game. No matter how many dark puppets Qin Yu killed, the total amount of their strength didn't change. The only difference was that their strength had shifted from the dead to the living dark puppets. In other words, the more dark puppets Qin Yu killed, the stronger the remaining ones would become. In fact, if there were only one or two left, their strength would probably be even stronger than the true Saint Realm dark puppet that he had just destroyed. The chief sovereign of darkness' ability to refine puppets was even more profound than he had imagined. He actually had this hidden attribute. Even if Qin Yu could rely on his tyrannical strength to exploit the flaws of this group of dead puppets and finally kill them all, just how long would that take? And to what extent would his own strength be consumed? Just thinking about it, one could tell that this path might be possible, but it definitely couldn't be taken. Otherwise, regardless of whether Qin Yu passed through or not, the Dark Ruler's plan would have succeeded. But if he didn't take this path, what could he do? Qin Yu felt a great headache coming on. His thoughts raced, and he suddenly had an idea. In the end, the dark puppets were dead objects. And since they were dead objects, there should be a way for a professional to deal with them. Although Qin Yu had the blood jade coffin and also obtained a ghost path cultivation method, he couldn't even be considered a beginner, much less a professional. Thus, this wasn't referring to him. He flipped his hand and took out the blood jade coffin. Although Qin Yu couldn't control this ghost path treasure as he wished right now, it wasn't difficult to make use of it. In the following matters, he would need to borrow its strength. With a wave of his hand, two figures flew out. They were the departed souls of Saint Zhou and Saint Lin that Qin Yu had personally killed not too long ago. After they were sucked into the blood jade coffin, their minds had been erased. But they could instinctively sense the great enmity between them and Qin Yu. Now that they had obtained their freedom, they roared out loud. Their eyes turned blood red, and they leapt forwards, wanting to drag Chinyu down with them. Umph! With a cold sneer, Chinyu gripped the blood jade coffin in his hands. The two saints' souls cried out miserably and immediately fell to the ground. Their crimson eyes revealed fear and awe. He had killed them when they were still alive, much less now that they were just two trivial souls. Chinyu didn't feel any fear at all. He lifted a hand and pointed, "Open the gate to the kingdom's destruction." Although they didn't have any intelligence, as the masters of the blood jade coffin, the two saints' souls could still understand Chinyu's orders. They flipped over and simultaneously reached out. With a deep roar, they seemed to grasp something and slowly pulled outwards. Rumble, rumble. A low rumbling sound reverberated in the void. A large grayish-white door appeared and was slowly being pulled open by the souls of the two saints. Who is it that dares to disturb the slumber of the great monarch of the kingdom's destruction? As the price, I will leave behind your lowly and weak souls. The cold and dignified voice suddenly stopped here. It finally saw the person who had opened the gate to the kingdom's destruction. Not too much time had passed, so it was naturally impossible to forget. Thus, at this time, the solemn monarch of the kingdom, a formidable existence comparable to a true saint, suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Then he shivered. Chinyu didn't have any expression. He went straight to the point. "Your Excellency, the ruler of a perished nation, I took the liberty to disturb you today because I would like to ask for your help in taking away these puppets. I hope that you can help me." Although he said he was asking for help, his tone didn't seem like he was asking for help at all. On the contrary, that icy threat seemed to flow between the lines, as if it would spill out at any moment. The monarch of the kingdom coughed. As the ruler of a world, he had his own pride and dignity. As he heard this, he nearly flipped out. But in the end, he only coughed and didn't say anything else. There was nothing he could do about it. In the end, what the world looked at was strength. And in the past, Chinyu had blocked the gate to the kingdom's destruction so that it couldn't close. Now that he thought about it, the monarch of the kingdom still felt fear in his heart, and his divine sense trembled. If he wanted to help, then so be it. Perhaps he could take advantage of this opportunity to form some relations with Peach Garden's Chinyu. This could be considered an additional harvest. The monarch of the kingdom could only comfort himself like this and find a way out of this embarrassing situation. He lightly coughed and was about to agree when his voice caught in his throat. This place is he had been shocked by Chinyu and feared the thing in his hand, so he hadn't discovered anything strange. But now that he regained his composure, he naturally recognized what it was. The world of darkness. His body shivered. The monarch of the kingdom wasn't willing to say anything else. Chinyu frowned. He coldly said, "What? You aren't willing to help me?" The monarch of the kingdom that had been forced to climb up a wall and was surrounded by blazing thorns all around him wanted to cry at this time. Chinyu didn't dare to offend him, especially since he had obtained a treasure of the ghost path and also had two Saint Spectre souls. He could open the gate to the kingdom's destruction at any moment, but this was even more of a favor that he didn't dare to help. Where was this? Behind the dark world was the Western Desolation. That was a true giant. He was just a tiny monarch of a kingdom. If he were to offend them, all that awaited him was death. "Your Excellency Chinyu, it isn't that I don't want to help, but that the dark world has a deep background. I don't dare to offend them." The monarch of the kingdom no longer cared about face. He bitterly smiled, his voice full of bitterness. He only felt that the life of a ghost was just too difficult. Chinyu's eyebrows arched up. A cold light flashed in his eyes. "You might be afraid of those people from the Western Desolation, but aren't you afraid of me? If you offend them, then you'll be pursued in the future. But if I'm not satisfied, then do you believe that I won't slaughter my way into your kingdom and teach you a lesson first?" Just as he was preparing to forcefully force the monarch to bow his head, he heard a breath of air blow into his ear. Then, that extremely gentle voice said, "If he doesn't dare to do anything, then why don't you ask me to help you?" At this moment, the monarch of the perished nation seemed to feel something extremely terrifying. He no longer cared about Chinyu's face. With a flick of his sleeve, he forcefully pushed back the two saints' souls and closed the gates of the perished nation with a bang. That was not the end. Gray chains appeared, wrapping around the gate of the perished country in the blink of an eye, sealing it completely. They also cut off all the aura fluctuations between the dark world and the perished country. Kacha! Kacha! With a light cracking sound, cracks appeared on the gates that were wrapped in gray chains. Then they shattered and dissipated. Chinyu frowned, and his pupils shrank. He turned to the side. A pair of beautiful eyes appeared, smiling as they looked at him. Seeing him look over, the eyes blinked and a voice sounded out in his ear. "Hey, this is our first official meeting, so let's say hello." Chinyu's lips twitched. He knew that the one who had scared the monarch of a kingdom so badly that he nearly pissed his pants and didn't hesitate to pay any price to destroy the gates of his kingdom was this person in front of him. A mysterious existence hidden in space-time. Didn't the stone tower say that the thing that these mysterious and strange existences like to do the most was to sign contracts with living beings all over the world? Why was the one in front of him so free? It felt like he had always been there, silently watching Chinyu's actions. This feeling of being taken care of, well, to be honest, it was really uncomfortable. Instead, it was a little creepy. However, since the other party had already come, Chinyu could only suppress the fear in his heart and say in a deep voice, "Mysterious existence hidden in space-time, I didn't summon you." This had to be made clear. Otherwise, if he started the contract again in a daze, he might be schemed against. The other party's eyes revealed a trace of dissatisfaction. Although he couldn't see his appearance, it subconsciously made people think of a blurry but cute face that was wrinkling its small nose. This monarch of a kingdom is too rude. He ran so fast and looked like he had seen a ghost. He obviously forgot that he was an evil spirit. Damn it. When I see him in the future, I will definitely teach him a lesson. The pair of eyes looked at Chinyu and sighed softly. "So, I really am not some scourge. You don't have to be so afraid." Chinyu didn't say a word. He just stared at him. A trace of grievance appeared in the eyes, and his voice also became aggrieved. Okay, I admit that you didn't summon me. I ran here on my own. I originally just wanted to ask you for some travel expenses. After all, it's so far away and it's not easy for me to descend. I didn't expect you to be so stingy." Even Chinyu couldn't help but feel his heart soften when he heard this performance. Then he felt a great sense of awe. These existences hidden in space-time were really strange and terrifying. He was clearly vigilant and afraid, but his mind was almost bewitched. With a cold face, Chinyu cupped his hands together expressionlessly. "Since there is nothing else, please go back. I will solve the problem here on my own." The eyes on the other side blinked, revealing a smug look. His mood changed so quickly that he almost sprained his waist. "Chinyu, are you sure you can solve it on your own? Let me tell you, these puppets aren't easy to kill. Moreover, there's something happening in that hall that I can't see clearly. If you continue to delay like this, I fear the consequences won't be good." Chinyu's complexion changed, and a gloomy look appeared in his eyes. He looked at the eyes on the other side and took a deep breath. He said in a low voice, "Mysterious existence hidden in space-time, I hope to make a deal with you. I would like to ask you to help me clean up these puppets. What kind of price do I need to pay?" Being decisive and decisive could be considered one of Chinyu's most dazzling strengths. Of course, the fundamental reason he made this decision was because his intuition told him that this mysterious existence wasn't lying. Without hands, it was unknown how he snapped his fingers, but the smile in his eyes brightened. "I knew you were a smart person. Handing these puppets to me is just a small matter." After a pause, he continued, "As for the price, I haven't thought about it yet. I can temporarily write it down for you." Chinyu shook his head. "To make a deal with a mysterious existence like you, it's best to make it clear." After thinking for a moment, he said in a low voice, "I will sacrifice a powerful soul to you as soon as possible as the price for asking you to help." His voice seemed indifferent as he said casually, "Sure, you can do as you see fit. I'm not too anxious." Chinyu sneered inwardly. He thought, "Like hell I'll believe you. I was almost tricked in the past." This time, he estimated that it would take another month. He had to remember it firmly and not forget it. At this time, the stone tower's faint voice sounded. Master, this time you only have half a month's time. Chinyu was enraged when he heard this. He almost revealed a strange expression. He gritted his teeth and roared in his heart. Can this time be changed at will? This time it's half a month. Next time, he will directly give me a day. What do you want me to do? The stone tower coughed awkwardly. That's not necessarily the case. There is always a line for unilateral changes. I didn't think that the time limit in the contract could be played with words. I fear that the origin of this existence is far more fierce than I thought. Master, you must be careful. You absolutely cannot violate the contract. Chinyu was so angry that he wanted to grab it and smash it into the ground. You bastard. Why didn't you say anything at the beginning? Now you're playing with hindsight. The stone tower had clearly expected that Chinyu would erupt in anger. After speaking, it shrank back and put on a turtle face. This clearly wasn't the time to pursue responsibility. Chinyu could only forcefully suppress his anger. He looked at the puzzled and somewhat immature eyes across from him. He felt that this other party was truly sinister and cunning to the extreme. Chapter 1443. Chinyu, what's wrong? A gentle and sweet voice sounded out, revealing a bit of concern that warmed his heart. But at this time, Chinyu naturally couldn't feel any warmth. On the contrary, he only felt a growing headache and dread. He coughed and said, I'm just curious as to why you would pay extra attention to me. In the end, this doesn't match your status. The pair of eyes blinked. Is that so? Actually, the reason is very simple. I will pay extra attention to those who are more interesting and have a better smell. I don't want them to get bullied or get into some other accidents. That will make my heart ache. Chinyu sneered inwardly. Like hell I'll believe you. But then he suddenly thought of something. Why did she say that he smelled better? These words always made one think of the kitchen and then the delicious food in the pots and bowls. It was truly terrifying to think about. As Chinyu suppressed this thought and decided not to think about it any further, the pair of beautiful eyes blinked again. She smiled and said, If, and I'm saying if, you are willing to give me that very, very bad tower in your hand, then our contract can be ended. No, shut up. Two voices sounded out at almost the same time. The one who objected was the stone tower that no longer looked like a turtle. It was anxious and panicked. The one who scolded was the pair of narrowed eyes. Indeed, this world always favored beautiful things. Even if these eyes were sinister and squeezed together, they still gave off a very beautiful feeling. But at this time, how could Chinyu care about appreciating them? Beads of sweat appeared on his back, and his body stiffened. He never thought that this person in front of him would be able to sense the existence of the stone tower. Her beautiful eyes revealed a trace of pitiful pleading. All right, just give it to me. I can even promise to help you one more time. Think about how easy it was for me to defeat the Eye of Darkness back then. This is already a very sincere offer. Chinyu took a deep breath and extinguished the comical softness in his heart. He said in a low voice, I refuse. The beautiful eyes were misty, making one feel as if they would cry at any moment. How could you be so heartless? I can still continue to raise the price. Before she finished, she was interrupted by Chinyu. There is no need to mention this again. I will naturally offer my soul to you at the appointed time. All right. Her large eyes became filled with resentment, as if she were a young wife that had been bullied. I'm not as heartless as you. What I said before remains the same. I'm not in a hurry for this soul. You can do what you need to do first and then sacrifice it later. This time, Chinyu didn't sneer. This was because he had grasped an extremely crucial piece of information from these words. Although this existence hidden in space-time could sense the aura of the stone pagoda, it couldn't detect their communication. Otherwise, he would have known that his sinister and cunning face had already been seen through by Chinyu, and he wouldn't have said anything more. His expression remained gloomy, but he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Otherwise, it would be far too horrifying if even his thoughts were spied on. Since the contract has been formed, please hurry up and make your move. I'm in a hurry. Yu gestured with his hand. All right. As if sensing that Yu didn't have the intention to say more, the pair of beautiful eyes simply agreed and looked at the dark puppets that were rushing over. He didn't do anything, but his eyes seemed to become brighter. Then, under his gaze, the bodies of the dark puppets collapsed and scattered like quicksand. In the blink of an eye, they were destroyed. Endless black gas surged out, but it couldn't find a host. Because at the same moment, these dark puppets of different strengths were all destroyed. Yu slightly widened his eyes. He was more and more afraid of the means of this mysterious existence. The turbulent black gas seemed to have sensed some danger. It whizzed back to the ring-shaped mountain, wanting to return to the hall. But at this moment, the sound of inhaling suddenly sounded. All the black gas suddenly froze, and the next moment, like 100 rivers flowing back to the river, whizzed back. Yu's eyes fell and saw that under the pair of beautiful eyes, there was now a small red mouth. At this moment, it was slightly opened, revealing white teeth, and a small canine tooth was mixed in it, which looked particularly cute. But seeing this cute little mouth swallow up all the black gas in the blink of an eye, Yu really couldn't think more. He only felt how terrible this mouth was. Burp, a not too loud burp. The pair of beautiful eyes showed a bit of shyness and hurriedly closed her mouth and disappeared. I didn't eat anything. I ate too much at once. Sorry for making a fool of myself. After saying that, he paused and seriously explained, these puppet essences are obtained after I killed them. They're not part of the total deal between you and me. You have to understand this. Yu pretended to be calm and nodded. Okay. Terrible. Too terrible. The more he came into contact with them, the more he found that the stone tower and the eye of eternal night were right. These mysterious and strange existences hidden in time and space were indeed very difficult to provoke. And now, he had obviously been taken care of by this person. Thinking of this, Yu's heart became increasingly gloomy. He felt that beneath the seemingly beautiful eyes of this person, there was a naked desire to devour him. If he wasn't mistaken, this person should want to eat him up in a single gulp. After all, he had already admitted that he tasted good. His scalp was a little numb. Looking at this pair of affectionate eyes, he felt even more uncomfortable. Yu coughed lightly and cupped his hands. Thank you for your help. I will complete the sacrifice as soon as possible. He had to be fast. Even if he had to kill the innocent, he absolutely couldn't give this person in front of him the slightest possibility of endangering him. In addition, there was another meaning in the words. The transaction is completed. You should go do what you need to do. Hurry up and leave. Although he was fine for the time being, Yu always felt a chill on his back when he was looked at by this pair of eyes, and his whole body didn't feel too strong. I said there's no hurry. You're just too paranoid. Isn't it tiring to live like this? The pretty eyes said bitterly. Clearly, she realized the deeper meaning behind Yu's words. Who had the time to think about whether or not he was tired? The most important thing was to continue living. If I was too suspicious, I would have already been eaten by you. As his thoughts raced, Yu didn't respond. He pretended to be confused. Humph. If you want to leave, then leave. But listen well. As someone I like very much, I won't allow anyone to harm you. So, if you need me, you must remember to summon me. My abilities are great, and I can help you no matter what situation you are in. This tone was truly boundlessly arrogant. Yu nodded, not taking it to heart. He only thought that this person was bragging about his status. Omnipotent. Haha. Not even a ruler would dare to say such words. After waiting for several breaths of time, there was no movement. Yu looked up and relaxed. The beautiful eyes that had been staring at him had already disappeared. Did they leave? The stone tower hesitated for a long time. Did they leave? This question and answer were all nonsense. Yu rubbed his temples. He felt his head swell up, and he nearly vomited blood from anger. What use do I have for this stone tower? It's useful. It's really useful. Master, don't be impulsive. The stone tower spoke quickly, afraid that Yu would be angered and agree to the transaction just now. Yu clenched his teeth. Shut up. He took a deep breath. He looked up at the ring-shaped mountain in front of him and then at the hall. Then he strode forwards. The Dark Ruler was here, and without a doubt, the Eye of Eternal Night was also here. Although he didn't know why it was in such a strange and silent state, as he thought of what that person had just said, he felt a sense of urgency. Soon, Qin Yu arrived at the base of the ring-shaped mountain. This mountain stretched out in a circle surrounding the entire hall. There was no gap at all. So, if he wanted to enter, he had to either climb over the mountain or forcefully open up a path on the mountain. Between the two choices, climbing over the mountain was certainly easier. But Qin Yu only looked up and saw the pitch-black curtain of the sky above him, as well as the falling grains of sand. He immediately gave up on the idea of flying up. If he couldn't climb over the mountain, then he could only open up a path. But it was clear that this wasn't an easy matter. Qin Yu looked at the mountain of sand in front of him. His eyebrows furrowed together, uncertainty in his eyes. Perhaps it wanted to make up for his mistakes and increase its importance in Qin Yu's heart. But the stone pagoda hurriedly said, "Master, there is no need to be anxious. I don't think it will be so troublesome to pass through this mountain." Qin Yu's eyes flashed. If you have something to say, just say it. His attitude wasn't good, but the stone pagoda relaxed. As long as there was communication, it was fine. If he didn't say anything, then it would be truly troublesome. "Master, please wait a moment. Let me confirm it. It will be very quick. It will only take a few breaths of time." This time, he wasn't wrong. In just a few breaths of time, the stone pagoda said, "It really is like this. Master, please look. This ring-shaped mountain in front of you is essentially a prison. Its goal is to trap and seal up a certain existence within it. If I'm not wrong, then it should be the Dark Ruler within this hall. After all, if the Western wilderness wants to control this powerful character that is comparable to a true saint, they will need to use some methods." These words were reasonable. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. "You are saying that as long as I transform into the aura of the Dark Ruler, I could be let in on my own initiative?" The stone pagoda's flattery was loud and clear. "Master is wise. That is exactly what I was thinking." Qin Yu frowned and thought for several breaths of time. Then he let out a breath. He might as well give it a try. As for how to come out after entering, that was clearly a difficult problem. But he could worry about that later. The most important thing right now was to hammer the Dark Ruler to death and not give him a chance to turn things around. With a thought, the pre-celestial spiritual strength within his body surged. Qin Yu's appearance didn't change, but his aura suddenly darkened. It was deep and obscure like an abyss, giving off a feeling of endless terror. The ring-shaped mountain in front of him trembled. Its surface instantly opened up and countless cracks appeared. They were like terrifying maws, but also like a taut bowstring that could erupt with a terrifying attack at any moment. A thick and cruel aura locked on Qin Yu. But there was a bit of hesitation in this locking. It was clear that the ring-shaped mountain was a bit confused. The Dark Ruler was clearly in the hall. This couldn't be wrong. So, why did another Dark Ruler suddenly jump out from outside? As the ring-shaped mountain was at a loss as to what to do next, Qin Yu made a choice for it. He walked straight towards the ring-shaped mountain. Although his expression was calm, his heart was tense. He was prepared to attack at any moment. After all, he didn't have much confidence in what would happen next. Luckily, nothing unexpected occurred. Sensing Qin Yu's approach, the ring-shaped mountain hesitated for a moment before it began to shake and squirm. The solid mountain turned into some kind of soft liquid substance, allowing Qin Yu to walk in and pass through the mountain step by step. With a single step, he left the ring-shaped mountain of sand. Qin Yu subconsciously let out a breath. He felt as if he had taken a trip to the gates of hell just now. This description wasn't an exaggeration. Qin Yu had already realized that the sand that formed the ring-shaped mountain wasn't simple at all. It contained a terrifying strength within. When he passed through the mountain just now, the mountain had become soft like water and didn't seem dangerous at all. But if it were to instantly solidify and freeze over, Qin Yu feared his fate would be miserable. Luckily, that sort of horrifying thing didn't happen. As Chinyu let out a breath of relief and looked towards the hall, a resentful voice suddenly sounded out. How could you not take care of yourself? What if something had happened just now? This voice hissed. Chinyu fiercely turned around. Sure enough, he saw those beautiful eyes appear once more. Had this person already left, or was he hiding in the shadows? If he couldn't even distinguish this, then what use did he have for this stone pagoda? The beautiful eyes blinked. If you think it's useless, you can give it to me. As long as you agree, I can help you settle all the troubles today. The price was raised again. The stone pagoda howled, Master, don't. The beautiful eyes narrowed. You're quite intelligent and disobedient. I like this sort of rebellious personality, so I like you even more. After a pause, she said, Chinyu, the conditions just now remain the same. Give it to me, and I can help you 2 more times for free in the future. Listen well, this is 2 times already. This is my bottom line. You must know when to stop and not be too greedy. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't tempted. As long as he nodded, the Dark Ruler would be a dead man. Moreover, he could complete the contract, and there wouldn't be any more troubles. Moreover, there would be 2 more free chances. With the strength of this mysterious existence, this was the same as Chinyu having 2 more lives. Temptation, temptation. Chinyu subconsciously licked his lips. The stone pagoda paled and shivered, as if it could already see its own tragic fate. But the following words left it stunned for a moment, and tears nearly filled its eyes. Chinyu coldly said, I said that there is no need to mention this matter again. The stone pagoda is not on the transaction list. Even if you increase the price by 10 times, I will still refuse. His words were resolute and decisive, as if there was no room for negotiation. But in truth, if this mysterious existence really increased the price by 10 times, cough cough, then that really might be the case. So, people always said things more beautifully than they did. This was a common problem. The stone pagoda was moved. It thought, Master, oh Master, I already knew that you were a loyal and righteous person. Don't worry, I will be loyal and do my best in the future. I won't let you regret the choice you made today. Of course, if it knew of Chinyu's true thoughts at this time, it would likely grit its teeth and curse him for being hypocritical and heartless. Luckily, the beautiful eyes didn't give Chinyu a chance to ruin its image. It sighed in disappointment. If that's the case, then forget it. Although this stone pagoda is fun, it isn't worth the price. As it spoke, it seemed to sense Chinyu's true thoughts. Without waiting for him to sweat, it changed the topic. But the strength that appeared in your body just now was quite interesting. If you want, Chinyu coldly interrupted it once more. I'm sorry, it isn't on the transaction list either. After a pause, his voice became even colder. And this time, it wasn't me who summoned you, but you once again appeared on your own initiative. The beautiful eyes blinked. I know. You really are cautious and stingy enough. Its reply was careless, but Chinyu had already obtained some information. His heart chilled, and he became even more vigilant. As he thought, it hadn't left at all. It had been hiding in the shadows. This was because Chinyu had used the word appear and not descend. The difference in a single word was a completely different concept. What was it waiting for? Or what was its goal? Chinyu suddenly discovered that today's matters had become complicated because of the arrival of this mysterious existence. Could it be that it was certain that Chinyu would make another transaction with it? Thinking of this, he felt even more uneasy. Chapter 1444. If the mysterious existence hidden in space-time decided not to leave and insisted on playing a shameless game, there was nothing Chinyu could do about it. In the end, this was all about strength. Since there was no way around it, he could only endure it. The only thing worth celebrating was that Chinyu had noticed this long ago and was able to make preparations early so that he wouldn't panic when things came to a head. Of course, strictly speaking, this was only a bit of comfort for himself. This was because he still didn't know what the other party's goal was. This was something that made one feel nervous and crazy just thinking about it. He glanced at the beautiful blinking eyes in front of him. Qin Yu resisted the urge to punch him and smash his fist into his face. Qin Yu, you don't need to be too touched. I'm always so warm to the people I like. Don't worry, I will be behind you. If you can't handle it, you can call me at any time. I will definitely handle everything for you beautifully without any mistakes. This was making things clear. Qin Yu clenched his teeth. Touch your ass. But being angry was useless. Since he had decided to endure it, there was no need to delay. Qin Yu took a deep breath and calmed his mind. He coldly looked at him and then walked out of the hall. He didn't even need to stretch out his hand to push the door open. It was completely empty inside, without any obstruction or obstruction. It was clear that as long as Qin Yu wanted to, he could directly enter with a single step. The previous dark puppets seemed easy to deal with, but the truth was that if Qin Yu hadn't made a deal with the existence hidden in space-time, wanting to completely exterminate these puppets would have been an incomparably difficult matter. Even if he could force his way through, it would have taken a great deal of time. When he sealed off the ring-shaped mountain in the second trial, he had used his own ability to change his aura to smoothly pass. Looking at this world, the only one who could use the power of a pre-celestial spirit to disguise themselves was probably Qin Yu. Thus, compared to the first trial, the dark puppets, the difficulty of this matter was actually much higher. Thus, at this moment, as he stood in front of the hall and watched the door quietly open, Qin Yu couldn't help but frown. This isn't a little too smooth? Without a doubt, this hall should be the same as the ring-shaped mountain in that it existed to imprison the darkness ruler. Qin Yu's current aura was similar to that of the Dark Sovereign. It was indeed possible for him to be approved and directly enter. But he didn't know why, but he kept feeling that something was wrong. As he stared at the wide, open doors of the temple, unease began to weave in his heart, becoming increasingly thick. Qin Yu had already said that time was of the essence, so he couldn't stay here for too long. Since he was unsure of what was going on in the hall, the best thing he could do was to ask the people in the hall. And the Eye of Eternal Night was right here, standing outside the palace with its doors wide open. Although it wasn't obvious, Qin Yu could still clearly lock onto its aura. Eye of Eternal Night, may I enter the main hall? A low voice came out of his mouth and spread into the main hall, echoing continuously in the emptiness. Time passed, and his voice gradually faded away. But he didn't receive any response at all. Qin Yu's frown deepened, and a sharp light exploded in his eyes. Qin Yu, I'll give you a piece of news for free. This hall is very dangerous. I suggest that you don't go in. A gentle and amiable voice filled with concern sounded out in his mind. If you are injured, I will be very distressed. Why don't you leave this matter to me? I can take care of it in minutes. Qin Yu's face was dark and gloomy. He didn't say a single word, simply ignoring the voice's intentions. His eyes slowly swept around the hall, and he suddenly lifted a hand and punched out. A wild and cold aura of darkness poured into the hall through the open doors, causing the void to shake. Since this hall existed to imprison the ruler of darkness, it would definitely have to react to the attack. Yes, this was a bit risky, but it was better than entering the hall in a completely ignorant state. Reality proved that Qin Yu's judgment was correct. As the aura of darkness swept out, the hall began to tremble. Runes began to appear on the surface of the hall, one that wasn't tainted by a speck of dust, releasing a formidable suppressive strength. With a stuffy cough, a figure appeared in the hall. It was the Dark Sovereign who had escaped. At this moment, his empty lower half had been completely restored. However, if one looked closely, they would discover that it was somewhat illusory. There seemed to be roiling clouds within it, and veins were slowly condensing. Seeing this, Qin Yu's heart chilled. As he thought, the Dark Sovereign wasn't easy to kill. In a short period of time, he had stabilized his injuries and had begun to restore his damaged mortal body. If he was given more time, he feared the Dark Sovereign would have been able to completely restore himself. But from the way the Eye of Eternal Night attacked, it should have had a high chance of success. So, why had its injuries been so easily resolved? Qin Yu's pupils shrank. He noticed that the Dark Sovereign was wearing a crown on his head. This crown was pitch black, nearly blending into the surrounding darkness. If it weren't for Qin Yu's careful observation and the fact that he had also comprehended the Tao of darkness, he likely wouldn't have discovered its existence. This crown was extremely luxurious. It gave off an ancient and dignified feeling, as if it were the crown of a true emperor. And now, between the eyebrows of this crown, there was a black bead embedded, nearly fusing into it. The eye of eternal night. This fellow had clearly been chasing the fleeing Dark Sovereign. So how had he ended up in such a state? No wonder there hadn't been any movement before. He had been thoroughly suppressed. And the reason the Dark Sovereign was able to quickly recover from his injuries was inevitably related to suppressing the eye of eternal night. There was a high chance that it had stolen its strength. As he thought about how the eye of eternal night had swallowed the Dark Sovereign's lower half and a great deal of his flesh and blood, he was almost certain of this. The situation instantly worsened. Qin Yu frowned, his eyes dignified. Originally, he had joined forces with the Eye of Eternal Night to beat the Dark Sovereign to death. But now, the Dark Sovereign had come ashore, and his helper had become prey. Qin Yu's first thought was to hurry and leave the world of darkness. From the fact that the Dark Sovereign hadn't done anything before, he knew that he was under a powerful restriction in this hall. But this thought only appeared for a moment before he suppressed it. First, it was easy to enter the ring-shaped mountain, but difficult to leave. Qin Yu didn't have much confidence he could leave, and second, once the Dark Sovereign swallowed the Eye of Eternal Night, his strength could be expected to rise dramatically. He might even be able to make up for his flaws and become a tyrannical existence comparable to a ruler. At that time, Qin Yu would be in deep trouble. The Dark Sovereign had suffered such a great loss and was now being chased all the way to his lair. How could he possibly endure this? In any case, Qin Yu felt that he absolutely couldn't endure this. It wasn't hard to guess what the Dark Sovereign would do once he gained power. Qin Yu took a deep breath and clenched his teeth. His thoughts stirred, about to summon the sun and moon phantoms and ask the Dark Sovereign to help. The reason was certainly sufficient. The Eye of Eternal Night was once your subordinate, and I was powerless to save it. I couldn't just watch helplessly as it perished. In addition, the Eye of Eternal Night was someone you arranged to help me smoothly enter the desolate region. But because of his incompetence, you have to take responsibility for this situation. That's right, that was it. As his thoughts turned to this point, Qin Yu's heart settled. But at this time, a faint voice suddenly sounded out. Qin Yu, are you sure you want to summon that beautiful big sister behind you here? That's right. She is strong and strong enough to help you settle the trouble in front of you. But don't forget what kind of place this is. That beautiful big sister might not want to expose herself to the eyes of the Western Desolate. Qin Yu was startled. He glanced at the pair of eyes floating beside him. He was surprised that they seemed to know a great deal. Moreover, what they said seemed to be reasonable. Although they hadn't truly interacted much, he could faintly feel that this woman didn't want to have anything to do with the Western Desolate. And right now, she seemed to be preparing something. If he ruined her plans because of him, he felt that the consequences wouldn't be good. He raised his hands and slowly lowered them. Summoning the Dark Sovereign to descend didn't seem like a good choice. Then what should he do? As Qin Yu's thoughts raced, the Dark Sovereign appeared in the hall. He chuckled and slowly said, Mr. Ninth is smarter than I imagined. You were actually able to use such a method to force me to reveal myself. After a pause, his voice became a bit more cheerful. But what a pity the Eye of Eternal Night isn't as cautious as you are. So, it can only end up being recklessly plundered by me. He lifted a hand and pointed at the black crown on his head, at the bead that had fused together with it. Eating random things is an extremely stupid behavior. I have already paid the price for my recklessness, but I never thought that the Eye of Eternal Night wouldn't be able to learn any lessons from this. Qin Yu was startled. The meaning behind these words was that when the Eye of Eternal Night swallowed his flesh and blood, the Dark Sovereign had already begun to make arrangements. And it was because of this that the Eye of Eternal Night ended up being suppressed and plundered. If this was really the case, then the Dark Sovereign's thoughts and schemes were truly sinister and terrifying. And Qin Yu's intuition told him that this was likely the case. The Dark Sovereign saw Qin Yu's cloudy expression and didn't seem to have any intention of speaking. He chuckled and continued to speak in a voice as gentle as the night. "Why don't you come in?" Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. "If I don't want to enter, then I naturally won't." The Dark Sovereign nodded. "Your intuition towards danger is quite sharp. I originally wanted to draw you in and use you to escape, but what a pity, I ended up leaving nothing behind." His tone was a bit rueful and a bit disappointed. He didn't hide his true thoughts at all. Qin Yu's complexion changed. He thought about how he smoothly passed through the crater and then looked at the silent hall in front of him. Anger appeared in his eyes, and he finally realized why he had felt so restless just now. His current aura was the same as the Dark Sovereign's. In other words, for this imprisoning hall, suppressing any one of them wouldn't make a difference. Once Qin Yu entered the hall, the Dark Sovereign would naturally have a chance to escape, and Qin Yu would replace him as the scapegoat. But why did he say it out loud? Chapter 1445. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. He glanced at the smiling and indifferent Dark Ruler. The other parties seemed calm and composed, as if everything was under his control. But it was the same question from before. Why did he say all of this? Did he only want to see Qin Yu be caught in a dilemma? Or perhaps he wanted to see Qin Yu feel uneasy? He always felt that with the Dark Ruler's level, will, and shrewdness, he shouldn't have done such a straightforward and obvious thing. Was there a problem here? Since he had locked onto the suspicious points, he could slowly analyze them, and he would surely obtain some harvests. The greatest possibility that the Dark Ruler had pointed out the current situation was to increase the psychological pressure on Qin Yu. When one was under great pressure, they would naturally become impulsive and irritable, unable to think rationally. In particular, in this sort of situation where one would inevitably be schemed against, he wanted to provoke Qin Yu to enter the hall. Thinking of this, he suddenly felt everything become clear and all his doubts were explained. From Qin Yu's point of view, if he didn't enter the hall and allowed the Dark Ruler to swallow the Eye of Eternal Night, his wounds would recover and his strength would rise even further. In the end, he wouldn't be able to escape death. On the other hand, if he rushed into the hall and realized the Dark Ruler's scheme, then he would be on guard and there wouldn't be any problems. There was no need to say what choice he should make. A sharp light exploded in Qin Yu's eyes. He stared at the Dark Ruler in the hall, his eyebrows slowly relaxing. "You want to provoke me to go in?" The Dark Ruler smiled. "Of course, if you come in, then I will be able to escape and avoid a great deal of trouble." He directly admitted this, his tone light and casual, as if he didn't care at all. Qin Yu's lips curved up. "I can maintain a calm voice, but something like a heartbeat is difficult to perfectly control. But as luck would have it, I obtained a divine ability a while ago that focused on the aspect of body refinement, so my five senses are rather sharp now. Oh, of course, my five senses are naturally much stronger than an ordinary person, so I just happened to be able to smoothly capture it." He took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled, a relieved smile on his face. "It seems that the Eye of Eternal Night is more useful than I thought. Although I know how you schemed against me, it isn't as if I don't have the strength to fight back. Since it can still struggle, and can even make you feel threatened and want to escape, then I naturally won't go in." The smile on the Dark Ruler's face faded a little. He stared at Qin Yu for several moments, and then clapped his hands in praise. Peach Blossom Garden's Mr. Ninth is truly wise. To think that he was able to see through these matters. I truly admire him. But have you ever thought that perhaps this was me deliberately letting you see it, using this as a pretext to stall for time so that you wouldn't barge into the main hall and ruin my plans? Qin Yu shook his head. "I must admit that what you say is indeed possible. But there are countless things in this world, and each one is different. Naturally, there are also countless possibilities. It is impossible for me to guess and weigh all of them to see which choice is the best. So, in the end, I can only believe in my own judgment." The Chief Sovereign of Darkness nodded. "Then you can wait outside. After I devour the Eye of Evernight, I'll come talk to you." His eyes flashed, and he continued. There's something I have to remind you of. Miss Knight's method of forcing me to show myself just now is enough. If you use it again, I'm afraid you'll be forcefully pulled in even if you don't want to. Sheen, you cupped his hands together. Thank you for the reminder. The air was quiet once more. The chief sovereign of darkness closed his eyes, no longer speaking. His slightly illusory lower body began to rapidly reform his meridians. At this speed, it wouldn't be long before he was completely restored. Outside the hall, Sheen Yu had no expression. He seemed motionless, but the truth was that it was impossible for him to truly fall into silence. Time was precious. It could be said that every second was a race against time. Although it seemed as if he was speaking nonsense just now, the truth was that Sheen Yu was stalling for time. Of course, without accident, the chief sovereign of darkness also had similar thoughts. It was unknown what he wanted to do, but Sheen Yu knew exactly what he wanted to do. He was waiting for the stone pagoda to make a judgment. Master, the situation is as the chief sovereign of darkness said. The aura of this hall has already changed. If you continue to attack it, there's a high chance you will be swallowed up and suppressed. As the stone pagoda spoke to hear, it paused for a moment, clearly wanting to continue. Sheen Yu furrowed his eyebrows. What time is it? If you have something to say, then hurry up and say it. Stop hesitating. The stone pagoda's voice was a bit strange. Yes, master, but let's first discuss something. Can you not use this word in the future? It sounds wrong. Blue veins popped up on Sheen Yu's forehead. Before he could speak, the stone pagoda hurriedly said, According to my observations, if master is forcefully suppressed by this hall, the strength of the seal here will sharply rise. At that time, the chances of the chief sovereign of darkness escaping will be very low. What do you mean? Cough, cough. It means that if master really has no other method, you could try this method. Everyone will be locked in this hall, and then you can slowly find a chance to hammer him. Sheen Yu rubbed his temples. Although he was dissatisfied that the stone pagoda was still in the mood to race at this time, he couldn't help but admit that this was an extremely smelly and dog's hit method. But even if it really was a pile of dog's hit, a method was still a method. If he was driven into a corner, he could still give it a try. In the worst-case scenario, Sheen Yu could break into the hall and entangle the chief sovereign of darkness for a bit. Even if he couldn't rescue the Eye of Eternal Night, he could still slow down the chief sovereign of darkness's plundering speed and increase the chances of the Eye of Eternal Night counterattacking. But even though he knew it was dog's hit, he still had to endure the stench and use it. He always felt a bit unwilling. Sheen Yu couldn't help but glance at those beautiful eyes. He thought that they definitely had many methods to resolve this matter. Another point was that the chief sovereign of darkness clearly didn't sense the existence of these eyes. This seemed like a very ordinary matter, but thinking about it carefully, with the chief sovereign of darkness's level and strength, and also in the world of darkness, even if he was heavily wounded and imprisoned, his strength was still incomparably terrifying. Even in such a state, the chief sovereign of darkness didn't even have the qualifications to see those eyes. This was what it truly meant to be horrifying. Sheen Yu suddenly felt a bit more dread towards this mysterious existence that seemed very easygoing and easy to talk to. His hands, eyes, and mouth were all beautiful, and he didn't seem to be too terrifying. So, the thought of asking him for help only appeared in his mind for a moment before he suppressed it. If he placed a few more bricks on top of it, it would be completely solid. Sheen Yu didn't forget that this mysterious existence hidden in space-time had shamelessly insisted on staying here from the very start. If he said that he didn't have any ulterior motives and was only willing to help others, he would rather poke out his own eyes. In short, he couldn't look for him to make a deal, at least not today. Sheen Yu took a deep breath. His mind raced, and a thought suddenly flashed in his mind. Thinking about it again, it seemed that it really might work. However, he still had to be cautious. He had to discuss this with the stone tower first. After all, this fellow knew a great deal. Stone tower, the reason I was able to smoothly pass through the crater and arrive in front of this hall is because my aura imitated that of the chief sovereign of darkness, right? Hearing this, the stone tower's first thought was, holy shit, I'm done for. Could it be that because of the current situation, Qin Yu was overthinking things, causing him to go insane? Otherwise, why would he need to ask if he was the one who did it? It was over, it was over. In today's situation, he hadn't even truly fought the enemy, and he had already fallen into chaos. How could he possibly survive like this? No, I have to stabilize myself. That trash Qin Yu has been scared out of his wits. I can only rely on myself to turn the tide. What should I do now? That's right, I have to stabilize Qin Yu first. I absolutely can't let him realize that I've been scared silly. Then I have to calm him down bit by bit so that he can regain his calm and think. Only like this can I see a slim chance of survival. With a light cough, the stone tower tried to make his voice as gentle as possible. Master's right. You're simply too smart. I know that nothing in this world can be hidden from your eyes. How could a frustrated and dispirited person recover their confidence from panic as soon as possible? Of course, it was unrestrained praise. This was praise for the great technique. Qin Yu frowned. He felt that at this moment, the stone tower's behavior was far too strange. But he wasn't in the mood to think about it. He continued to say, "My aura is the same as the chief sovereign of darkness. So I smoothly passed through the crater, and this hall in front of me was able to forcefully suck me in and suppress me. Well, I'm saying that if I continue to attack it, right? It was over." How could he praise the great technique for being ineffective? Let alone restoring his sobriety. This was clearly even more serious. He was even beginning to speak incoherently. What to do? What to do? I have to stabilize myself, woo woo woo, but I can't. I'm really panicking right now. Qin Yu saw that the stone tower didn't respond and knew that he couldn't delay any longer. He furrowed his eyebrows and continued to say, if my aura was still that of the chief sovereign of darkness, but I became different, would I be able to change this situation? In other words, the reason I can continue to attack the hall is because it is the key to suppressing the chief sovereign of darkness. That strike just now forced the chief sovereign of darkness to reveal himself is the best evidence. The stone tower. Oh, so Qin Yu wasn't crazy? I knew it. During this period of time, he had experienced so many trials and tribulations. There were even more terrifying scenes than today. So how could he suddenly become as timid as a mouse? Cough, cough. Luckily, I was calm before and didn't reveal any fear. Otherwise, I would definitely be mocked by Qin Yu in the future, and I wouldn't be able to raise my head again. Cough. I think that what Master says is reasonable. But the key is how to simulate the chief sovereign of darkness and become different from the chief sovereign of darkness. Although I haven't personally entered, I must remind Master that the suppression of this hall isn't simple at all. I fear it is impossible to conceal it with ordinary methods. Qin Yu's lips twitched. Do I need you to remind me of this? What nonsense! If this hall wasn't fierce, how could it suppress the dignified chief sovereign of darkness? This stone tower was acting strangely at this critical moment. Could it be that it had been scared out of its wits by the chief sovereign of darkness? Qin Yu didn't know, but the two of them, master and servant, had different impressions of each other. Cough, cough. The degree of overlap was quite high. But thinking about it, the chief sovereign of darkness in front of him was the strongest existence Qin Yu had ever faced. After all, in the world of darkness, this was an existence comparable to the vast sun ruler. Even if he was injured and imprisoned in his current state, his strength wasn't something a true saint could compare with. If Qin Yu wanted to hammer him, he feared that if he wasn't careful, his head would explode first. Hiss! He hadn't realized this before. Sure enough, carelessness was an unavoidable problem. Cough, cough. This was also the fault of the chief sovereign of darkness. He had made a grand entrance, but in the end, Qin Yu and the Eye of Eternal Night had joined forces and easily hammered away half of his body. He had to drag his broken body and flee in a sorry state. The difficulty level didn't seem to match his status at all. But thinking about it carefully, how many saints in this world would dare to use the Tao-shattering sword technique? To use one's own life as an attack? It would be strange if the power wasn't terrifying. In addition to the powerful eye of eternal night and the incomparably powerful inherited supernatural ability, picking stars, he was able to achieve such an overwhelming victory. If it were anyone else, let alone killing the chief sovereign of darkness and forcing him to flee, they would have been hammered to death on the spot and brought home to be made into popcorn. Cough, cough, caution, caution. He had to be even more cautious. Qin Yu's heart trembled. He took a deep breath and said, "Hidden divinity." The stone tower paused, a hint of hesitation in its voice. Hidden divinity? Veins popped out on Qin Yu's forehead. He was filled with resentment and annoyance once more. What use do I have for this stone tower? Let me tell you, I'm here for you to give your opinion. Who needs you to repeat it? Could it be that I can't hear my own words? The stone tower panicked. Originally, it could feel Qin Yu's trust, so it didn't panic too easily. Even if it panicked, it was mostly a pretense so that Qin Yu could obtain more psychological satisfaction and a sense of accomplishment. But now it was different. That mysterious existence hidden in space-time, although it was silent and didn't say a word, it was still glaring at it from the side. The stone tower could feel the interest in those beautiful eyes. Really, you must believe me. Although those eyes were very beautiful, when they locked onto you, it was a very uncomfortable feeling. It felt like it had become a piece of meat on the chopping board. Although it hadn't been thrown into the pot yet, it was only a matter of time before it was eaten. That's right, this was the feeling. The stone tower was gratified by its own ability to express itself, but then it became even sadder, because when it thought of this, the entire stone tower felt even worse. It felt like it was in despair. It had proposed a deal with Qin Yu. Although it had been coldly rejected and left no room for negotiation, the multi-talented stone tower was well aware that there was nothing in this world that was absolutely reliable, especially a man's mouth. If it believed half of it, it would have to pay taxes. Thus, it had to work hard to display its own value. Only the more useful it was, the more likely it was that it would be retained and not abandoned without hesitation as a transaction partner. Master, I've thought about it carefully. There is a chance of success. No matter what, it had to first express its opinion and then worry about the rest. Qin Yu frowned. Really? The stone tower suppressed its panic. Really? Qin Yu lifted a hand and punched out. At the same time, he used the hidden divinity art. The aura of his soul instantly vanished as it escaped into another space. Dong! As the fist fell, the hall violently shook. The stone tower. He attacked just like that? He had already attacked, but I really wasn't thinking about it. I was just going along with your words. Didn't this seem a bit reckless? Qin Yu was expressionless. In truth, before he spoke, he had already made the decision to attack. Obtaining the stone tower's approval was only a bit of psychological comfort. After all, the worst that could happen was being forcefully sucked into the hall and being suppressed. First of all, there were still some bullshit methods that could be used. Second of all, the great Tao that he had just condensed could be broken and sent out again. Third of all, if he really fell into a hopeless situation and couldn't think of anything else, then he could only abandon all scruples and summon the ruler to descend. Of course, Qin Yu wasn't someone who didn't make preparations. He thought that the woman might refuse to descend in order to hide herself. Thus, there was a fourth point. That was the mysterious existence that was floating behind him, looking at him with gentle and soft eyes. Cough, cough, in truth, the stone tower wasn't wrong. A man's mouth was an incomparably mystical existence. If it was believed half of it, it would have to pay taxes. As the saying went, the world changed with time. He couldn't just watch helplessly as he was about to be hammered to death by someone else and stubbornly cling to his old ideas. As long as he could ask him to help, then the ruler of darkness wouldn't be a problem at all. This really wasn't looking down on others without reason. That person was floating right in front of you, but you couldn't even see him. What else could you do with this trash level of skill? Qin Yu had to admit that he was a person who cherished his life. In a situation where it wasn't absolutely necessary, it was best if he didn't risk his life. Thus, combining these 4 points together, this was the key to his brazen attack. Shua, in the hall, The ruler of darkness opened his eyes. His eyes were pitch black, like an endless abyss. At this time, his eyes locked onto Chinyu. The corners of his lips curved up in a mocking smile. "You've been fooled." Chapter 1446. He had been trapped in this hall for so many years. Although he hadn't been able to break the seal, after spending so many years together, he had finally gained some understanding of it. It wasn't difficult to make use of it a little. Thus, just now, the chief ruler of darkness had deliberately said those last words to remind Chinyu of what had forced him out. This was because as long as he attacked again, the dark ruler could stimulate the suppressive strength of the hall and forcefully pull Chinyu in. In other words, Chinyu's guess wasn't wrong. The hall trembled. The dark ruler stuffily coughed. The suppressive strength of this place was aimed at him. After being stimulated, the suppressive strength erupted. The first to suffer was, of course, the dark ruler. In exchange for a little suffering, he could pull Chinyu into the hall. This was a very good deal. But in this world, things didn't always develop according to a person's wishes. This was why there was the word accident. And today, the dark ruler soon discovered that he had suffered an accident. The suppressive strength of the hall had erupted. In normal circumstances, Chinyu should have been swept up by the wild strength and pulled into the hall. But now he was still standing outside. The suppressive strength of the hall howled past him, causing his robes to flutter up like strong winds. But he was like a strict army that didn't dare offend him. The dark ruler's smile froze. He stubbornly stared at Chinyu, his eyes as sharp as arrows, as if he wanted to pierce through him. His plan had failed, but why was it like this? After determining that Chinyu was the main culprit behind Western Wasteland's utter defeat in the Zeroth world, he had begun to prepare his plan. To be able to change one's aura and possess the ability to change into a myriad of forms was Chinyu's strongest ability. But at the same time, it was also the path to his death. The dark puppets couldn't stop Chinyu. At the start, the dark ruler was well aware of this. After all, he was a character that could destroy Western Wasteland's years of hard work. The ring-shaped mountain was to make Chinyu relax his guard, so he could easily rush in. The true killing move was in this hall. As long as Chinyu stepped in and erupted with strength, no matter how many cards he had, the dark ruler was confident he wouldn't even have a chance to use them. Everything proceeded smoothly. According to his plan, Chinyu had changed his aura and arrived outside the main hall. Then, he had received the signal to attack the main hall. This should have been the time to draw in the net and enjoy the harvest of the battle. But things had come to this step, and he was stuck. The greater the expectations, the greater the disappointment. The gloomy-faced chief sovereign of darkness could be considered a very shrewd and resolute individual, but he was able to force himself not to vomit out a mouthful of blood. It worked. Chinyu let out a long breath, his heart relaxing. Although there was still 1, 2, 3 for options, if he could directly hammer the dark ruler to death, then that would be the best result. And now, Chinyu saw hope. The main hall existed to suppress the god of darkness. Now that he had suppressed the eye of eternal night, he was wantonly plundering the eye of eternal night's energy to recover from his injuries. Although the eye of eternal night appeared to be in a pitiful state, it clearly had the ability to retaliate. All it needed was an opportunity. What Chinyu needed to do now was to give it this chance, to attack the main hall and constantly stimulate the suppressive strength. As the dark ruler was trapped within, he naturally wouldn't feel too good. When he was in pain, the opportunity came. Thinking of this, Chinyu didn't hesitate at all. He raised his hand and punched out again. The main hall trembled. The runes that appeared on its surface became increasingly bright. After being provoked again and again, it was clear that the dark ruler was truly enraged. There was a loud, crackling sound as tiny bolts of lightning appeared in the void of the main hall. They howled as they struck down, all of them focused on the chief sovereign of darkness. Even with his cultivation, he couldn't help but stuffily cough as his complexion paled. Above his head, on that dignified and luxurious crown, the eye of eternal night that was embedded within it was silent. But A pair of eyes appeared from the deep darkness. They were dim and listless, and there was also a bit of pain in them. But they seemed more indifferent and calm, as well as a ruthless and bloodthirsty killing intent. Seeing this, Qin Yu's heart calmed. Everything he had said before was just a guess, but now that he saw the eye of eternal night awaken, he was able to confirm his guess. It really did have the strength to resist. This was of utmost importance. Otherwise, everything Qin Yu did now would be meaningless. He could either think of a way to escape, or he could summon the chief sovereign to descend, or he could make a deal with that pair of eyes behind him and quickly flatten the chief sovereign of darkness. Now that the eye of eternal night had awakened, all Qin Yu needed to do was continue to stimulate the suppressive strength of the main hall and teach the chief sovereign of darkness a good lesson. He needed to have him understand what it meant to be tortured and what it meant to be torn apart. Bang! Another fist punched out. The runes that appeared on the surface of the main hall doubled in number. With a humming sound, the surrounding space began to twist and fold. Crackle! Crackle! More and more bolts of lightning appeared, becoming increasingly thick. The chief sovereign of darkness's body emitted black smoke, and his hair stood up. His face turned even paler, and his eyes were filled with shock and anger. The chief sovereign of darkness never imagined that things would develop to this point. He originally had a certain chance of victory. Even if he couldn't scheme against Qin Yu in the end, he would at most take some risks. As long as he could refine the eye of eternal night, everything would be settled. But now he was trapped in the main hall, trapped within a cage. He couldn't touch Qin Yu at all. It was like he was suspended in midair and could only passively endure the whipping. It was both sad and angry. And what was even sadder was that the chief sovereign of darkness was well aware that the suppressive strength of this main hall was capable of fatally wounding him. In other words, even if Qin Yu didn't do anything and continued to stimulate the strength of the main hall and increase its suppressive strength, even if the eye of eternal night didn't do anything, he would still be played to death. Just thinking about it left him filled with grief and indignation, so depressed that he nearly vomited blood. For the dignified chief sovereign of darkness to be reduced to such a state in his own lair, this was truly lamentable. But right now, he didn't have time to be sad, nor did he have time to sigh. He had to think of a way to save himself. Sitting here and waiting for death was something that the chief sovereign of darkness couldn't accept. Qin Yu, the deep roar, was heavy and oppressive. It was no longer as calm as before. Qin Yu paused and looked up. The chief sovereign of darkness said in a low voice, "I believe that you joined forces with the eye of eternal night to surround and kill me. There must be some secret behind this. If I tell Western Desolation about this, no matter what you want to do, it will all end in vain. Believe me, even if I am trapped in this main hall, the eye of eternal night won't be able to stop me if I want to send a message. This is a very simple matter." Qin Yu let out an "oh" and punched out again. The main hall was enraged. The lightning in the void was like a whip that came crashing down. The chief sovereign of darkness body twitched. He gnashed his teeth and roared, "Are you really not afraid?" Qin Yu shrugged. "So what if I am afraid? The situation has already reached this point. Do you think I can just give up?" "Holy shit, you have a good reason." The chief sovereign of darkness' mouth twitched. He hurriedly said, "I can swear that as long as you give up today, I won't pursue anything that happened in the past. In fact, I can even help you achieve what you want. Believe me, if the eye of eternal night can help you, I will naturally be able to help you achieve what you want after I devour it. In fact, I can even give you more." His eyes were sincere and his voice was solemn. He stared at Qin Yu, waiting for his response. Qin Yu fell silent. Just as the chief sovereign of darkness thought that there might be a turning point, he sighed and shook his head. "Your Excellency, Chief Sovereign of Darkness, might be sincere, but I don't dare to believe you. In order to avoid any accidents, I ask that you die earlier." "Qin Yu," the Chief Sovereign of Darkness roared out in rage. Endless and cold energy erupted from him. At this time, he was like an abyss that could swallow all. "With my status and identity, this is already the limit of my patience. Don't push your luck. Don't force me to take a risk. His eyes were pitch black, and every word that came out of his mouth emitted a bone-chilling chill. Believe me, truly believe me, an existence that can compare to a chief sovereign can't have no cards in their hands. It isn't that I don't have the strength to fight, it's just that I don't want to take too great a risk. But if I didn't have a choice, I would still do so without hesitation. After all, there is still a chance of success if I take a risk. Even if I fail, a glorious struggle is better than dying in humiliation. Qin Yu was expressionless, but his heart shrank. His intuition told him that the chief sovereign of darkness wasn't lying. And in truth, this was even more reasonable. How could a powerful character that could make a chief sovereign feel a sense of dread and maintain the existence of the dark world to this day be reduced to such a state where he couldn't even resist? There had to be a card in his hand. But what could Qin Yu do? As he said before, with the situation having reached this step, there was no possibility of retreat. As for what the chief sovereign of darkness said about not pursuing the past, Qin Yu didn't believe a single word of it. If he didn't die today, Qin Yu would surely have troubles in the future. Moreover, there was still the existence of the Eye of Eternal Night. Although it didn't seem valued too much, it was still that woman's subordinate. If he sold it like this, would there be no future troubles? So, this was still a dilemma. If he continued to attack, the chief sovereign of darkness wouldn't be willing to wait for death, so he could only give it his all. Once he attacked, it could be imagined that his methods would be heaven-shaking and earth-shattering. Not to mention whether or not he would succeed, the first thing he would do would be to kill Qin Yu to vent his anger. After all, at the bottom of it was all because of him. He understood everything and thought of everything. But in this dilemma, he could only choose the lesser option. If the chief sovereign of darkness went all out and used his final trump card, Qin Yu might be able to block it. If there was no other way, he could only call for help. Although it wouldn't be good in the end, it was better than leaving behind a great disaster for himself. So, no matter what, the chief sovereign of darkness had to die today. If he lived, how could Qin Yu feel at ease? Let me think about it. Bang! A fist punched out. The hall shook. Apart from a void, bolts of lightning, blue wind blades appeared, howling as they sank into the chief sovereign of darkness body, leaving behind a seemingly unremarkable trail of blood. Fine! Bang! Another punch. The chief sovereign of darkness roared. Qin Yu. Qin Yu seemed to wake up from a dream. He revealed an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, I was too absorbed in my thoughts just now. It was a completely subconscious action. Then have you thought about it? Bang! A third punch? The words that the chief sovereign of darkness were forcefully cut off. As the void bolts of lightning and wind blades smashed into him, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Ah! With a wild roar, the chief sovereign of darkness lifted a hand and pointed it between his eyebrows. Gotcha! There was a light sound, as if something within his body had broken. From the start, he had faintly sensed that Qin Yu wasn't willing to reconcile with him. It was only that he held onto a sliver of hope and endured it until now. If he didn't have to risk his life, then it was best not to do so. Wasn't it better to live a peaceful life? But these 3 punches had shattered the chief sovereign of darkness' final hope. After determining that there was no longer any possibility of reconciliation, he could only take a risk. With this step, all of his years of preparation would be wasted, not to mention the great risks he had to take. But even if he could smoothly escape, he still wouldn't be able to break free from the suppression of the Western wilderness. And if he couldn't break free from the Western wilderness, then to the chief sovereign of darkness, he still wouldn't be free. His countless years of patience and waiting would all come to nothing. Bitterness, unwillingness, anger, all of it turned into hatred towards Qin Yu. If the anger in his eyes could kill, he feared he would have already been burnt to a charred corpse. Qin Yu, the chief sovereign of darkness, roared out once more. He fiercely looked up, his face fiercely twisting. His flesh and skin wildly wriggled, and within the festering flesh, a mouth appeared, revealing sharp fangs. It emitted a cruel and destructive roar. The horrifying scene before him didn't end. Rather, it was only the beginning. This was because similar changes were occurring all over his body at nearly the same time. The robes on the chief sovereign of darkness body melted away, turning into a thick black liquid that fused into his flesh and blood. The exposed chief sovereign of darkness had already lost his human form. He had turned into a crazily wriggling mass of flesh and blood. The surface of his body festered, and within every festering area, there was a giant mouth that constantly opened and closed. The roars were filled with madness and chaos, constantly echoing through the hall. After Chinyu heard them several times, his complexion changed. He coughed and temporarily sealed off his sense of hearing. Even so, he still couldn't completely isolate out these roars. They seemed to be able to penetrate through the body and directly affect the soul, causing one's mind to become restless and agitated, even giving birth to an urge to destroy everything. Although Chinyu had already guessed that the chief sovereign of darkness trump cards would be terrifying and cruel, he was still shocked by what he saw. The scene in front of him was losing control of the Great Tao. At the true Saint Realm, one could condense the Great Tao. This was their greatest reliance, the result of a lifetime of cultivation. But if external factors caused their Great Tao to distort and they lost control, this would lead to the current situation. In other words, they would suffer a backlash from the Great Tao. They would become a twisted monster that would eventually self-destruct. Although the chief sovereign of darkness had grasped light and darkness as one, he still walked the Great Tao of darkness. Now that he suffered a backlash, darkness would erupt and destroy all. Just as Chinyu was thinking this, the puddle of flesh and blood that the chief sovereign of darkness suddenly erupted. His entire body seemed to become a fountain of flesh and blood. Massive amounts of flesh and blood gushed out, spreading out in all directions like a tide. Wherever it went, everything was covered in flesh and blood, becoming a part of the darkness. This was because the flesh and blood that gushed out was corroded by the source of darkness. It could be seen as the manifestation of the endless abyss. Everything it covered was the abyss. In other words, everything would eventually be swallowed up. And this was the trump card that the chief sovereign of darkness had prepared. He should have waited until he escaped his imprisonment to refine the eye of eternal night, and then open it outside the hall. At that time, the hall in front of him would be swallowed up by darkness, becoming the final stepping stone on the path of the chief sovereign of darkness. He would have freed himself from the control of Western Wasteland and truly become a ruler. He would have filled in the vacancy of the vast young ruler and grasped the great destiny that existed in the dark. With this, the chief sovereign of darkness even had the chance to leap up and peer into a higher level, perhaps even reaching an unimaginable boundary. Of course, all of this had become nothing now. The fountain of flesh was incomparably fierce, and the firepower was potent. In just several breaths of time, it covered nearly the entire hall. As was said before, the chief sovereign of darkness and this hall had been together for countless years. Although he had been miserably suppressed here, he still had a deep understanding of the other. Even though he had lost consciousness, his instinct to understand was still there. In the shortest period of time, he completed the basic swallowing. A pair of eyes appeared in the festering flesh and blood. Amidst the violence and madness, he still managed to retain a trace of reason. He glared at Chinyu with incomparable hatred. Chapter 1447. Darkness gushed out from the palace door, condensing into a giant hand that grasped Chinyu. As expected, the first thing it wanted to do was kill him to vent its anger. This could barely be considered as having anticipated the enemy. The Eye of Eternal Night didn't move. It was unknown if it had been dealt with by the backlash of the Great Tao, or if it was still waiting for an opportunity. In short, the only thing Chinyu could rely on right now was himself. He sighed inwardly. Luckily, he was already prepared, so he didn't panic. He took a step forwards and clenched his hand. The cry of a sword echoed in his mind. He didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but he could faintly feel a bit of excitement. Thinking about it, this sword of the EC had lain dormant in the depths of the sea for countless years. Now that it finally had a chance to display its brilliance in the world, it was naturally excited. This was understandable. But as he thought about the price the Sword of the East Sea had to pay for displaying its brilliance, and how the great Tao it had just reformed had been crushed to pieces, Qin Yu felt a bitter taste in his mouth. Looking at this world, there was probably no one besides him who could shatter the great Tao and still be alive and kicking. But this matter, it didn't feel right no matter how he thought about it. It didn't seem to be something worth being proud of. At most, his ability to seek death and not die was first class. Ha! Qin Yu clenched his fingers. Although his mouth was bitter, he didn't hesitate to attack. Otherwise, he could only watch helplessly as he was swallowed up by the darkness. He didn't need to experience that feeling to know it wouldn't be good. As mentioned before, every time Qin Yu's great Tao was shattered and reformed, its quality and strength would rise. In other words, when he shattered his great Tao, he would be able to release an even more formidable strength, making the Sword of the East Sea even more powerful. There was something that had to be made clear. The Sword of the East Sea's might wasn't limited to this. In the end, Qin Yu's strength wasn't enough. He could only barely activate his great Tao to erupt with a single strike, and that strike was far from perfection. From his point of view, Qin Yu was indeed trash. At this time, Zhe Yu's sword fell. The great Tao within his body shattered, and all of its strength was sucked out, pouring into his sword. A wild and destructive strength erupted, instantly piercing through the darkness that rushed out of the palace door. It continued to slash towards those venomous eyes. When a true saint reached the other side of cultivation, he was already at the peak of the world. Even though he wasn't as powerful as a sovereign, a life-risking strike wasn't something that could be easily blocked. Not to mention, it had the support of the Sword of the East Sea. As the saying goes, the more you eat, the stronger you become. This simple principle could be applied to it as well. Bang! An earth-shattering explosion erupted from the depths of the main hall, accompanied by countless splatters of rotten flesh and blood. The sword intent wreaked havoc, slashing open countless wounds. It seemed extremely terrifying, almost slicing the darkness ruler into 800 pieces. But in reality, this was not enough to cause any fatal damage to him. When the raging sword light gradually dissipated, the pair of resentful eyes reappeared. Even though it was much dimmer and revealed a trace of weakness, the coldness, ruthlessness, and hatred within it did not dissipate in the slightest. Qin Yu sighed inwardly. Indeed, with his current methods, killing true sages was easy. But when it came to sovereigns, or those close to the sovereign's realm, he was still far from being able to do so. The Tao-shattering sword was his most powerful technique, but it could only slow down the Dark Lord slightly and wound him slightly. Since he couldn't kill Qin Yu, then with the hatred in the chief god of darkness's eyes, he would certainly use even crueler and more vicious methods to deal with Qin Yu. Roar! Within the fountain of flesh and blood, the rotting flesh began to rapidly grow on the surface of the flesh. Giant mouths began to open up. At this time, these mouths opened up and emitted ear-piercing howls. It was like countless wooden stakes were ruthlessly stabbing into one's soul. Not only was the pain able to evoke the deepest darkness in one's heart, causing one's temper to rise to the point of insanity. Qin Yu was already in a weakened state after his Tao shattering. He stuffily coughed, and blood flowed out from every orifice of his head. His face twitched as he couldn't suppress the pain he felt. Darkness surged out. This time, it wasn't a giant hand, but icy cold and slippery tentacles that howled towards Qin Yu. Although it was fast, there was still some distance between it and Qin Yu. In normal circumstances, it would give him some time to react. But at this time, the tentacles that flew out from the main hall trembled and vanished from sight. When they reappeared, they were right in front of Qin Yu and wrapped around him. As the tentacles touched flesh and blood, there was the sound of corrosion. Then, they sank into Qin Yu's flesh, wanting to forcefully pull him into the main hall. Within the rotting flesh, the eyes were filled with hatred and excitement. Although the Dark Ruler still maintained a trace of lucidity, he was still affected by the backlash of the Great Tao. At this time, there was only a single thought in his mind: to kill Qin Yu in the cruelest and most painful way possible. In fact, the reason the Dark Ruler impatiently attacked Qin Yu was to save himself. Only by killing him could he quell the anger and resentment in his heart. Only then would he have a greater chance of remaining clear-headed and surviving the backlash of the Great Tao. And now, Qin Yu was about to die. In his current state, since he had been caught, it was impossible for him to struggle free. With a light sigh, Qin Yu revealed a helpless expression. Indeed, a powerhouse that neared the level of a ruler had a dazzling array of methods. He had already been caught, let alone being in a weakened state. Even if he was in perfect condition, he still wouldn't be able to resist it. Being pulled over was absolutely unacceptable. That mountain-sized pile of rotten meat was so disgusting that it made one want to vomit at a glance. If he was eaten by it, the taste would surely be so sour that it would make one flinch. Since he had relied on himself to fight until the end and was still attacked, he could only call for help. There was a moment of hesitation in his mind. Should he summon the Lord Ruler, or should he make a deal with that quiet and beautiful pair of eyes behind him? But in just an instant, Qin Yu made a decision. He would follow his own heart. With a thought, the phantoms of a sun and moon appeared above his head. The reason he was able to summon them so quickly was because he was already prepared. He only needed a single breath of time to complete the summon. As for whether or not that woman would respond, well, unless she could find someone else to help her complete the mission to enter the desolate region, she shouldn't be able to stare blankly on as he died. Puff, puff. There were two light sounds. It was like a balloon that had been inflated to the point of bursting. Although it wasn't loud, it caused Qin Yu's heart to go cold. That woman had simply and neatly refused without hesitation. It couldn't be. She was actually so heartless that she didn't hesitate at all. But soon, Qin Yu discovered that the one who shattered the phantoms of the sun and moon wasn't the Lord Ruler. A faint sigh sounded out in his ears, filled with grief and confusion. Qin Yu, how could you be so stubborn? It will be so easy to ask for my help. As long as you said a single word, none of this would be a problem. But in the end, you wanted to shatter the heavens with your shaft. This is a bad habit. You have to change it. Otherwise, sooner or later, you will suffer a great loss. Qin Yu's first thought was that he was about to be dragged over by a pile of rotten meat and eaten up in a miserable manner. How could he have time to listen to this nonsense? Moreover, what sort of joke was shattering the heavens with my shaft? Moreover, the phantoms of the sun and moon that I created involved the summoning of the Lord Ruler. So how could you destroy them? Of course, this wasn't the main point. The main point was mysterious existence hidden in space-time. You have destroyed my plan to save myself, causing me to fall into a desperate and dangerous situation. So, you must take responsibility for this matter. As Qin Yu hurriedly spoke, he discovered that the black tentacles were still tightly wrapped around his body. His flesh and blood were being corroded, and the speed at which they were pulling him had become incomparably slow. It wasn't that the speed had become slow, but that the time around Qin Yu had been forcefully twisted, slowing down countless times over. Time laws. Even though Qin Yu himself had managed to grasp this ultimate law when he was relatively weak, the number of times he had used the time laws could be counted on one hand. But in fact, the number of times he had used the time law could be counted on one hand. Firstly, the cost was too great, and secondly, its effects were relatively limited. To put it simply, it was useless. If he didn't have to use it, he would naturally use it as little as possible. Without a doubt, this was the first time that Qin Yu had truly experienced just how formidable the time laws were. To instantly distort the flow of time in a small area was the same as placing the enemy and himself in two completely different worlds. If he used this to kill his enemies, wouldn't he be successful in every endeavor? An existence hidden in space-time, a terrifying and mysterious existence that could be referred to as him, truly had a shocking strength. But even this hidden existence that could easily control the time laws and change the flow of time in a small area was left speechless by Qin Yu. It never imagined that at this time, Yu would still dare to play such a skilled and shameless trick. After several breaths of time, he quietly said, Yu, if you have a chance to come into contact with other hidden existences in the future, you absolutely must not hold such an attitude. There really is a chance that you will die. He took a deep breath and turned to look at the hall. Within that lump of rotten flesh, there was a fierce and cruel expression, as well as a bit of hesitation and fear. It was clear that the Dark Ruler, who had lost control, had finally sensed something strange around Yu. I will help you deal with this matter. Just consider it an occasional act of kindness. Who told me to like you so much? As soon as he finished speaking, a hand directly bore out from nothingness. It was fair and exquisite to the point that every single finger seemed as if it was meticulously carved out of the finest ivory, and it emitted a faint glow. Just a glance at it caused one to exclaim with admiration from the bottom of one's heart. But this pair of hands, beautiful to the point that they didn't seem to contain the least bit of smoke or fire, as if they didn't belong to the mortal world, gently pointed at the hall. Really, it was just like this, a casual tap, and then everything was over. Within the great hall, atop that giant mountain of rotten flesh, the eyes of the darkness sovereign suddenly lost all luster. Hatred, violence, excitement, bewilderment, fear, all sorts of emotions vanished, leaving behind only a gray blankness. This was because as the finger landed, the consciousness that belonged to the ruler of darkness was like a shallow pencil line on a piece of white paper that was wiped clean by an eraser. Not a single trace of it was left. Bang! The dark ruler who had lost consciousness was no longer able to maintain his out-of-control state. Thus, that giant lump of meat in the hall suddenly collapsed and broke apart. It split into countless pieces, each one crazily struggling, desperately trying to reform itself. Horrifying mouths appeared one after another, but they only had time to emit a short and despairing cry before they broke apart and disintegrated. All of this took a long time to describe, but it all happened in a single breath of time. In the blink of an eye, the entire hall fell deathly silent. There was only that pile of rotten flesh that had gone completely limp. Occasionally, there would be some remnant instinctive reaction that would gently twitch and emit muffled popping sounds. This was a horrifying scene. Even though Yu was experienced and knowledgeable, he still couldn't help but instinctively feel a trace of fear. This fear came from the dead Dark Ruler in front of him, and the remaining 70% came from the fear and awe he felt towards him. In this out-of-control state, the Dark Ruler might not have been fully conscious, but his strength had definitely reached a level that was infinitely close to or even comparable to a ruler. However, the Dark Ruler, who was in such a state, had actually been obliterated by a single finger. If he said he wasn't afraid, then that was absolutely bragging. The beautiful palm vanished from sight. The pair of eyes turned to look at Yu, revealing a faint smile. I already told you that no matter what it is, as long as you ask, I will definitely be able to help you. If I didn't have some ability, how could I dare to say such words? It seems you must have thought I was bragging before. Yu's face stiffened. He naturally didn't dare to admit it. He bowed and said, I thank you for your noble character and unquestionable integrity for helping me out of your obligation. I will remember today's favor, and if there is a chance in the future, I will surely repay you. He spoke these words in earnest, his expression solemn and grateful. But the truth was that he was panicking inwardly. He had confirmed that this person in front of him was nearly omnipotent, and yet he still insisted that today's matter was his obligation to help. Just thinking about it made Yu feel that his courage wasn't ordinary. But he had no choice but to insist on this matter. Otherwise, for a mysterious existence hidden in space-time to help him kill a powerhouse that was nearly at the level of a ruler, just what sort of price would be appropriate? One didn't need to think with their knees to know that this was a price that Yu couldn't afford. Since he couldn't afford the price, he could only renege on his debt. This was the only way. His eyes flashed, and he quietly said, I just said that I was occasionally being kind, so you don't have to remind me so many times. How come you still don't remember the reminder I gave you? Chinyu, you need to change your attitude in the future. Not everyone is as easy to talk to as I am. I didn't obtain anything this time, and instead I lost a great deal of strength. What a loss. I have to think of a way to make up for it from somewhere else, so I'll be leaving first. After speaking, this pair of beautiful eyes vanished from sight. Who? Chinyu just exhaled halfway when it suddenly drilled out and stared at Chinyu in an awkward manner. Your strength is unfathomably deep. Being beside you makes me nervous and apprehensive. I lost control of myself for a moment. I hope you don't mind, he quietly said. You have already seen the result of the backlash of the Great Tao. So, you must often remind yourself in your heart. The Great Tao needs to be taken good care of. He glanced at Chinyu once more, and then his beautiful eyes vanished. Did he really leave? Chinyu patiently waited for a long time. After confirming that he had really left, he raised his hand and rubbed his stiff face. At the same time, his mind subconsciously began to recall what this person had just said. Oh, there seemed to be a meaning behind it. Chinyu subconsciously frowned, and then his fingers stiffened. Could it be that he was reminding him? The Great Tao needed to be taken good care of, but Chinyu honestly didn't know much about it, much less take care of it. In addition to the sword of the East Sea, its power was fierce. If this sword fell, even a ruler would have to temporarily avoid it. But the price of this sword was to shatter his own Great Tao. If it was shattered, how could he talk about taking care of it? In particular, with Chinyu's current state, it was obvious that he had shattered it more than once or twice. If this trend continued, it was possible that he had shattered it 8 or 10 times, or even more. In this situation, what would happen to the Great Tao? Looking at the ruler of darkness who had turned into a pile of minced meat in the hall, Chinyu's heart chilled and the hairs on his back stood up. Hiss! He had to pay extra attention to this aspect. He didn't want to fall to such a state one day. As for how to understand and take care of the Great Tao, it seemed that he needed to seriously discuss it with his eldest senior brother after returning to the Peach Garden. As a true saint of the Permitha continent through the proper path, he should have some understanding of this aspect. If not, he would go to the EC Dragon Palace and find that old dragon to have a good chat. In short, he had to pay attention to it. He took a deep breath and suppressed the tumbling thoughts in his heart. Chinyu glanced at the place where he had left, and a trace of solemnity appeared in his eyes. This person's actions were becoming more and more unfathomable. He pointed out the hidden dangers in his body and helped him for free. But in this world, how could there be love and hate for no reason? Intuition told Chinyu that there would definitely be many connections between them in the future. He hoped that he could find a reason as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be hard for his heart to feel at ease. Stepping into the hall, Chinyu resisted the urge to vomit and began to carefully search. He hadn't forgotten his original intention of killing the ruler of darkness. Moreover, the eye of eternal night was still embedded in the crown. He didn't know if it was still alive. Chapter 1448. There was far too much rotten flesh, and the stench of blood filled the air. Chinyu looked around for a long time and finally couldn't stand it any longer. He summoned the ever-burning flame and left the hall. Once it was touched, it would burn endlessly. This was the ever-burning flame. The flames rose up. After a moment, they were extinguished. Chinyu flicked his sleeves, stirring up a great wind that swept away the ashes. In the empty hall, the black crown quietly fell to the ground. Chinyu looked down and saw the eye of eternal night embedded in the center. Although it was much dimmer, it hadn't broken. Luckily, it seemed its life was tough. First it was suppressed by the Darkness Chief Sovereign, and then it was plundered. Then, it experienced the backlash of the Great Tao and still hadn't died. The hall seal had already been broken. Chinyu already knew this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to step inside. Now, there was nothing to worry about. He stepped in and bent down to pick up the Darkness Emperor crown. As if sensing Chinyu's aura, the eye of eternal night flashed with an incomparably dim halo. Then, a pair of eyes slowly appeared. They were dim and lifeless, and they seemed to be at a loss as they looked at Chinyu. He didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but from this gaze, Chinyu could feel an incomparably complex emotion. There was hesitation, shock, fear, and disbelief. But soon, before Chinyu could observe it any further, all of these emotions vanished, as if what he saw just now was just an illusion. Chinyu furrowed his eyebrows and said, "Tell me, what happened? You were clearly the one who chased after the Darkness Chief Sovereign. So how did you end up being suppressed?" After a moment of silence, the eye of Eternal Night's weak consciousness sounded out. "I was careless and fell into the Darkness Chief Sovereign's trap. Thank you for saving me." This was strange. Ever since the eye of Eternal Night had seen the Lord Ruler's attitude toward Chinyu, even though he hadn't said anything on the surface, Chinyu could clearly sense that the eye of Eternal Night was unconvinced, unbalanced, and faintly hostile towards Chinyu. For the eye of Eternal Night to thank him in person was truly unexpected. Chinyu felt a bit strange. He coughed and said, "It's good that you know. In order to save you this time, I paid a considerable price. You must remember my life-saving graciousness." These words weren't wrong. Chinyu had even shattered his recently reformed Great Tao, so it wasn't an exaggeration to say that he had paid a great price. Cough, cough. The only thing that was slightly awkward was that this self-destruction of the Great Tao didn't actually play any decisive role. But regarding this matter, Chinyu obviously wouldn't admit it. The eye of Eternal Night sounded a little absent-minded. "All right, I'll keep that in mind." Chinyu was finally able to confirm that there was something wrong with this fellow's condition. Was he affected by the backlash of the Great Tao? His heart tightened. The scene of the Dark Ruler losing control was still vivid in his mind. He didn't want to face it again anytime soon. He could sense that the eye of Eternal Night had weakened a little, but its condition was still stable. Its power showed no signs of going berserk. If nothing went wrong, then he could eliminate the possibility that he was affected by the backlash of the Great Tao. Was he frightened? After all, even though Chinyu had personally experienced what had just happened, compared to the eye of Eternal Night that had been swallowed by the Ruler of Darkness, the experience was definitely on a different level. It was not impossible. TSK, you've lived for God knows how many years, but you still don't have much courage. What Chinyu didn't know was that the eye of Eternal Night had indeed been frightened by his random thoughts. It was just that the specific reason was different. The true source of the eye of Eternal Night's fear came from the mysterious existence hidden in space-time. It came from its aura, that aura impossible, absolutely impossible. The eye of Eternal Night's heart was in a mess. Countless thoughts intertwined and collided. It felt like its entire mind had turned into a rolling paste. It found it hard to believe, but the truth was right in front of it. It had confirmed it many times in its personal experience just now. Yes, it was the truth. No, I must stay by Chinyu's side. He clearly had an extraordinary relationship with the existence hidden in space-time. I'll definitely find the answer if I follow him. In short, no matter what, I can't let my master suffer any harm. With this in mind, the Eye of Eternal Night instantly made a decision. With a slight buzz, Chinyu looked at the Eye of Eternal Night that had completely become one with the Dark Crown. Their auras were fused together, and there was no possibility of them being separated anymore. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. What kind of operation was this? The Eye of Eternal Night said indifferently, "In order to express my gratitude to you, I am willing to give up my freedom and fuse with the Dark Crown. This will make its power even stronger, and it will be enough to ensure that you can perfectly conceal yourself. No one will be able to detect any abnormalities." The words were extremely sincere, and it was reasonable to repay the kindness of saving his life. But for some reason, Chinyu felt that it was extremely strange. He kept feeling that the Eye of Eternal Night, which had completely fused with the Dark Crown, was staring at his reaction with its eyes wide open. His face stiffened, and he coughed lightly. Actually, you don't have to be so magnanimous. Oh, so serious. This matter is ultimately to help me. The Eye of Eternal Night said indifferently. Masters will be carried out. I'm doing this to ensure that no accidents will happen to you in the following matters. Qin Yu already knew that this fellow was loyal to that woman. So when he heard this, although he still felt that it was strange, he could reluctantly accept this matter. TSK. If you're loyal to such a degree, then I think you're the one with the most brains here. Qin Yu coughed lightly, suppressing these thoughts. He hesitated for a moment before saying, since you have already fused with the Dark Crown, then in the future we might have to spend time together. So, can you retract your gaze a little? I keep feeling like I'm being watched by you. The Eye of Eternal Night paused for a moment. It dryly said, sorry, I don't have much experience. I won't do it in the future. Then, the feeling of being watched disappeared. Qin Yu rubbed his eyebrows. Although he still felt that something wasn't right, thinking about it, there didn't seem to be anything bad about this matter. He coughed lightly and got to the point. How do I use the Dark Crown? The Dark Ruler has died, and the crown has returned to an ownerless state. If you take a drop of blood, you will naturally become its new master. Qin Yu raised an eyebrow. That's it. That's it. It was unknown what the Eye of Eternal Night thought of. It paused for a moment before continuing to explain. In truth, the more precious an object is, the easier it is to recognize a master. This is because the true difficulty lies in the process of obtaining them. The so-called treasures of the heavens and earth belong to those with the ability. Since you can obtain them, then you naturally have the qualifications to become their master. Although this explanation was a bit crude, if one carefully thought about it, it was very reasonable. One could even understand it as the Eye of Eternal Night's flattery. Qin Yu was secretly pleased. To be able to make this arrogant fellow lower his head, he felt a bit of a sense of accomplishment. Even the discomfort of his weak body seemed to lessen a little. Qin Yu's lips curved up. He flicked his finger and a drop of blood flew out, falling onto the Dark Crown and fusing into it. He closed his eyes and quietly sensed it for a moment. Then, he placed the Dark Crown on his head. With a thought, it vanished from sight. A smile appeared on his face. Qin Yu opened his eyes, filled with joy. The Dark Crown could indeed further strengthen his ability to change his aura, ensuring that no one could sense his ever-changing appearance. But this wasn't the Dark Crown's full ability. Or, it was more accurate to say that amongst its many effects, it wasn't too dazzling. Let's put it this way. In the Dark World, the Dark Ruler being able to compare with Ruler Vastyong was half of the credit. But now, the Dark World had clearly become Qin Yu's home field. Let me think a little. In the future, in the Dark World, would Qin Yu be able to fight a ruler? There was probably a bit of a disparity. One had to admit that Qin Yu's strength was a bit lacking compared to the Dark Rulers. But one couldn't forget that Qin Yu was able to reform the Great Tao, and he also had the Sword of the East Sea in his hand. With both of them erupting together, even a ruler wouldn't be able to gain an advantage in the Dark World. This could be said to be completely unprepared. Had his strength risen yet again? At the very least, in terms of life-saving methods, he now had another powerful card in his hand. Thinking of this, Qin Yu's smile widened. When he heard the Eye of Eternal Night say that it needed to sleep for a period of time to recover, he nodded in agreement. He looked up at the quiet hall in front of him. Perhaps it was because it had been swallowed up by the backlash of the Great Tao of Darkness before, and now that Qin Yu had become the new master of the Dark Emperor crown, there was actually a strange connection formed between them. Qin Yu had an intuition that he really could swallow and refine this hall. It was a hall, but it was more like the manifestation of some kind of dark strength. After refining it, there would surely be benefits. Should he swallow it or not? Qin Yu's heart stirred. The stone pagoda's voice sounded out. Master, this hall comes from the western wilderness. If you refine it, there might be an accident. It paused for a moment and said, after all, you've only seen 2 cases of people randomly eating things and having a stomach upset. It's best to be a bit more cautious. Qin Yu thought for a moment and felt that this was reasonable. He took a deep breath and suppressed the thought of refining the hall in his heart. In any case, it was already meat in his mouth. It wouldn't be too late to eat it when things were stable in the future. He carefully looked around. After determining that he hadn't missed anything, Qin Yu left the hall. He swept his eyes over the ring-shaped mountain. On the surface, it didn't seem any different from before. But the truth was that a change had already occurred. The ring-shaped mountain and the hall were one. They were both a part of the seal. And now, a subtle connection had formed between Qin Yu and the hall. The result was Qin Yu stepped out. The ring-shaped mountain became soft, like a mass of liquid that he easily passed through. It was almost the same as when he came. But in the end, it was different. When Qin Yu transformed into the Dark Ruler's aura, it was the same as being sealed inside. But now, the seal here had opened on its own initiative to send him away. The meaning behind this was completely different. Indeed, it was as he imagined. The Dark Ruler was imprisoned here. The Dark Ruler was controlled by the Western Wilderness, the seal that prevented him from being free. But now, Qin Yu could control his strength. It had to be said that different people had different fates. This sort of differential treatment was an incomparably sad matter. Luckily, the Dark Ruler had already died. Otherwise, he would have been filled with grief. Killing the Dark Ruler had been full of twists and turns, but Qin Yu hadn't truly experienced despair. What he relied on wasn't his own strength, but the thigh that had mysteriously appeared behind him. Unfortunately, Qin Yu still didn't know why that thigh had become his thigh. Moreover, deep in his heart, there was always a faint fear. He was worried that one day, the thigh that supported him would stomp him into meat paste. He had to be careful about this. He couldn't be careless. Shaking his head, Qin Yu suppressed his thoughts. He lifted a hand, opened a portal, and stepped out of the world of darkness. Shua! In the next moment, Qin Yu's figure appeared in a strange small world. This place was desolate and didn't have much life. Within his divine sense, he could only sense a few weak auras. Now, because Qin Yu had suddenly appeared and hadn't restrained his aura, they had been given a fierce fright. Qin Yu was disinclined to observe their reactions. He lifted a hand, and the void trembled. A portal appeared in the peach blossom garden. He pushed it open and stepped inside. Their little junior apprentice brother had left and returned. This trip wasn't long, but what left Bai Feng even more numb was that she discovered that her little junior apprentice brother's great Tao had shattered. Although her eldest senior apprentice brother's expression was still calm, there was a bit of stiffness that couldn't be concealed within this calmness. Eldest senior apprentice brother. Bai Feng hesitated and couldn't help but speak up. But just as he spoke these 3 words, he was interrupted. The eldest senior apprentice brother sighed and smiled. Little junior apprentice brother is an extraordinary individual. He is not someone that you or I can imagine. So, third junior apprentice brother, please don't ask about this matter anymore. Because even if he asked, he wouldn't know how to answer. The true Saint Great Tao was the foundation that crossed the endless sea of bitterness and reached the other shore. It was the key to a saint's cultivation. If one's great Tao collapsed, a saint would perish, but this rule clearly couldn't be applied to their little junior apprentice brother. This was already the second time, and this was only what they had seen with their own eyes. Who knew if this had happened before? After all, when their little junior apprentice brother shattered his great Tao, it wasn't difficult for him to condense it. The last time it happened was 5 days, right? My memory is quite good, so I haven't gone insane. But in a short 5 days, he completely condensed his great Tao, and his strength rose even further. Although this was something they had seen with their own eyes, and it had happened right in front of them, they still didn't think it was a fantasy. It was hard to believe. Their eldest senior apprentice brother's footsteps were steady as he left. But his eyes were unfocused, and the corners of his mouth twitched, revealing a bit of confusion. 10 days later, Qin Yu left seclusion. Without any hesitation, he went straight to his eldest senior apprentice brother's residence. Her first words made eldest senior brother, who had just managed to maintain a smile on his face with much difficulty, freeze on the spot. Eldest senior apprentice brother, how can I take care of my great Tao? The eldest senior apprentice brother looked at Qin Yu's face and saw that he was earnestly asking for guidance. His lips couldn't help but twitch. He thought to himself, was such a simple question something someone like you, who had shattered your great Tao and condensed your great Tao, should ask? This time was 10 days, right? That's right, 10 days. Haha, my memory is really good. It was twice as long as the last time. But thinking about it, compared to the matter of his great Tao shattering and then reforming, what was 5 days? Perhaps his little junior apprentice brother was only trying to make his reformed great Tao stronger and more resilient than before. After all, the strength of his great Tao was astonishing. If he wasn't careful, it would shatter. Sensing it, he found that his little junior apprentice brother's aura was much deeper and more vigorous than before. It was just as he guessed. In other words, if his little junior apprentice brother didn't pursue the quality of his great Tao and only focused on condensing it, he would have left seclusion much earlier. He didn't know why, but he suddenly felt tired. The tired eldest senior apprentice brother squeezed out a smile and tried to keep his voice as calm as possible. Little junior apprentice brother, why do you ask about this? You made some slight changes. He only said that he had coincidentally seen a true saint lose control, so he felt some dread in his heart and so on. The eldest senior apprentice brother's heart skipped a beat. Just what did his little junior apprentice brother do when he disappeared? Wasn't it common to see a true saint lose control everywhere? If such a thing really did happen, it would surely cause a great calamity. But recently, Vast Yang had been relatively peaceful and there hadn't been any similar news spreading out. Sensing the strange look in the eldest senior apprentice brother's eyes, Yu knew that his excuse had been seen through. He immediately understood the reason and coughed. Eldest senior apprentice brother, there are some secrets involved. It's not convenient for me to tell you right now. The eldest senior apprentice brother waved his hand. I understand. If it's inconvenient for me to say it, then there's no need to say it. He took a deep breath and looked at Yu with a solemn expression. Concerning the great Tao, I have only just completed it, so I'm not too clear on it. But there is something I must warn you about. The great Tao has its own spirituality. You can think of it as a kind of consciousness hidden outside of our understanding. But the condensation of the great Tao is not something we can control. Yes, we can only passively accept it. Junior apprentice brother needs to understand the meaning. For example, when I condensed the great Tao, I felt I was powerless. It's like the process of condensing the grand Tao is like a copy, and the object of the copy is the world that we are in. The so-called great Tao of heaven and earth runs through every corner of the world and exists between all things. It's indescribable and uncontrollable. When we cultivate to the true sage level, it's probably an imitation of the great Tao of heaven and earth like a shadow. The senior apprentice brother stood and walked back. He great Tao, he great. He said. He had, he Ming Tao. He. After pausing for a while, eldest senior brother nodded in confirmation. That's right, it's this feeling. Using the great Tao of heaven and earth as the blueprint, we copy it when we achieve Tao. It's equivalent to replicating an incomplete shadow of the great Tao of heaven and earth, or rather, it's like taking an incomplete shadow of the great Tao of heaven and earth and merging it into our great Tao. That's why it has spirituality. His complexion paled and exhaustion filled his eyes. He looked at Yu apologetically. I haven't been a saint for long, so I only have this shallow understanding. If junior apprentice brother has anything he doesn't understand, you can only rely on yourself to slowly speculate and comprehend it. Everything the elder senior apprentice brother said was indeed difficult to understand. In particular, when it came to the relationship between the great Tao, shadows, and spirituality, it was enough to make an ordinary cultivator feel dizzy and confused. But Yu was different. He had come into contact with the shadow of the abyss, as well as Liao Shi, who had vanished without a trace and might never return. He naturally understood the true meaning behind these words. A shadow in the abyss had developed a consciousness and lived for countless years. It had become an old turtle that had once obeyed his orders. As for Liao Shi, he had been the projection of some formidable existence. He had seemed alive, but in the end, he had vanished without a trace. Yu's heart chilled. It was because he already knew that shadows had a spiritual nature that he discovered this matter was far more thorny than he had imagined. Within the true Saint Great Tao, there were shadows of the Great Tao. It was no wonder that once there was a backlash, even someone as formidable as a saint couldn't resist it and could only turn into a horrifying monster and die a miserable death. The stronger one was, the more they knew and the more awe they felt towards this world. A true saint was incomparably powerful, but that was only the result of a lifetime of cultivation. They simulated a shadow of the Great Tao and used this to complete a transformation of their life level. A ruler had gone a step further, but from this perspective, it was only an increase in the degree of simulating the world. Compared to the Great Tao itself, what was a true saint or a ruler? As for the backlash of the Great Tao, it was highly likely that the cause came from the spirituality contained within the shadow of the Great Tao. Even if it was only a shadow, it was still the shadow of the world. After experiencing the existences of the old turtle and Liao Shi, Qin didn't dare to underestimate them in the least. Even if it was only a shadow, it was still a projection of the world. Perhaps human strength could contend with it, but Qin didn't think he could do so right now. In other words, once the backlash of the Great Tao erupted, there was a high chance he wouldn't be able to resist it. His heart chilled, and his complexion turned dignified. Across from him, the elder senior apprentice brother hesitated. Since junior apprentice brother has sensed something, you should be more cautious in the future. Perhaps if you slowly restore it, there won't be any problems. Qin Yu had long since realized that his elder senior apprentice brother had guessed something. He bitterly smiled. I fear it's a bit too late. He wouldn't remind him for no reason. Since he had already spoken, there was a high chance that something bad had already begun. It was just that Qin Yu hadn't noticed it yet. Before this, he might have had doubts. Could it be that his own Great Tao couldn't sense the subtle changes that were occurring? But now that he learned of the existence of the shadow of the world's Great Tao, Qin Yu no longer had the confidence to do so. The shadow of the world. Who knew what sort of power it possessed? It wasn't impossible for it to conceal all changes so that a cultivator wouldn't be able to sense anything. The elder senior apprentice brother's complexion changed, revealing an anxious look. Just as he was about to speak, he was interrupted by Qin Yu. Elder senior apprentice brother, there's no need to worry. There are only some clues, but nothing wrong has occurred yet. The reason I asked you today is because I want to make preparations early so that I won't be caught off guard in the future. He hesitated for a moment and then bitterly smiled. I originally planned to replace elder senior apprentice brother and extend Peach Maiden's life after I returned. But now that my Great Tao isn't right, I don't dare to take any more risks. So, I will have to trouble elder senior apprentice brother to continue bearing the burden. The elder senior apprentice brother solemnly said, Junior apprentice brother, there is no need to be like this. Honorable Master's graciousness to me is as heavy as a mountain. If it weren't for him saving me in the past, I would have died long ago. Junior apprentice Sister Peach Maiden is Honorable Master's only daughter. Now that Honorable Master is no longer here, I am willing to do anything for her without any reluctance. He could hear the sincerity in his elder senior apprentice brother's words without the slightest bit of falsehood. After Qin Yu sighed inwardly, he felt a bit of admiration. Thinking for a moment, he flipped his hand and took out a fruit. This was the fruit he had obtained from the Wind Saint when he was in World Zero. It could be used to enhance one's Great Tao. Unfortunately, Qin Yu had relied on the cheating method of the Great Furnace to condense his Great Tao. He didn't need to do anything during the process, so he naturally didn't have any leeway to interfere. As such, he didn't have a chance to use this fruit. And even if he did, Qin Yu wouldn't waste it. His Great Tao had already been shattered twice. If he used this fruit, it would at most increase the power of his Great Tao shattering sword by a bit, and then that would be it. Now that he gave it to his elder senior apprentice brother, it should be of some help to him. It was a suitable gift. Elder senior apprentice brother, I don't have anything suitable in my hands right now. This fruit is beneficial to the Great Tao, so consider it a little compensation. I ask that you accept it. Looking at Qin Yu's earnest expression, the elder senior apprentice brother shook his head and smiled. All right, then I must thank junior apprentice brother for your kind intentions. Qin Yu stood up. He cupped his hands together and said, Concerning the great Tao, I still have some questions. I will need to temporarily leave the peach garden to find an explanation. As he spoke, he bitterly smiled. Recently, I've discovered that I've been incomparably busy. I haven't had a single moment of free time. The elder senior apprentice brother coughed. Junior apprentice brother, are you trying to tell me that the greater one's ability is the greater one's responsibility? Qin Yu was stunned. He never thought that his elder senior apprentice brother would joke around with him. And what was even more embarrassing was that he really did have such thoughts. Ha ha ha. Across from him, the elder senior apprentice brother laughed. He reached out and patted Qin Yu's shoulder. Right now, the junior apprentice brothers and sisters of the peach garden are all in seclusion. Once you resolve your troubles and settle down, we can gather together and have a good drink. This can also be considered a celebration of the peach garden's rebirth. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Of course. He bid his farewells and left. He stopped the inquisitive Baifeng outside the door and tossed her a few words. If you have any questions, go find your elder senior apprentice brother. Then, he summoned a portal and stepped inside. Baifeng was left behind with a constipated expression. She stood outside the elder senior apprentice brother's courtyard, a bitter smile on her face. If I could ask elder senior apprentice brother, I wouldn't have to rush over to stop you after I receive the news. As for the great Tao shattering and condensing, I really want to know just what happened. If one inadvertently offended a powerhouse, they would inevitably feel restless and uneasy at first, fearing that they would suffer retaliation. But if a powerhouse grew stronger and stronger, they would soon be like the sun in the sky. Perhaps they would even take a step further and look down on all others. At that point, they wouldn't be afraid. There was no other reason. The disparity between them was too great, like the difference between heaven and earth. With the other status, how could they possibly lower themselves to do something so boring as revenge? This was the approximate mental journey of the dragon girl during this period of time. At this time, she was comfortably lying down on a soft chair, gently swinging her tail that had come out of nowhere. Her eyes were half closed, as if she were about to fall asleep. Great changes had occurred in Vastyong, but no one was willing to provoke them. The tyrannical dragon saint who occupied the East Sea, as a direct bloodline descendant of the dragon girl, still enjoyed peace and stability. At this time, it was unknown what she was thinking about, but her lips curved up in a smile. This smile was light, but it hid a bit of pride. After all, this matter was the most dazzling experience of the dragon girl's life. Although she didn't realize this at the beginning, it didn't stop her from secretly feeling proud. Looking at Vastyong, how many people could provoke Qin Yu and still escape unscathed? You could go ahead and take a look. Starting from the Netherworld Saint, all the other formidable existences that came after Qin Yu were either wounded or killed. The title of the Saint Slaughtering Specialist wasn't just for show. With Qin Yu's current prestige and influence, there was no one that could compare with him besides a ruler. This dragon girl was the one that had offended Qin Yu, and not just once. Yet, she was still alive and kicking. Ignoring everything else, just this point alone was enough to make her submit. However, even to this day, the dragon girl still found it hard to believe. Back at the EC's birthday banquet, that common-looking little disciple of Peach Garden who had followed Peach Garden around her had actually managed to achieve his current achievements in such a short period of time. Every time she thought of this, she wondered if she was dreaming. Due to the intense thoughts in her mind, her drowsiness faded a little. The dragon girl yawned and ungracefully stretched her back. Perhaps because she was in the inner hall, she was dressed very casually. Now that her chest was half unbuttoned and her waist was exposed, her good figure was on full display. Coupled with the small and exquisite tail behind her, she exuded a particularly seductive aura. Qin Yu didn't expect to see such an alluring scene as soon as he stepped in. Immediately, a trace of embarrassment appeared on his face. He had locked onto the dragon girl's aura and descended directly. He wanted to enter the East Sea Dragon Palace through her so that the old dragon wouldn't be scared away. After all, Qin had heard of the reputation of the saint slaughtering specialist. Previously, under the watchful eyes of countless sages, he had killed Sage Zhou and Sage Lin. It would be strange if the dragon sage wasn't afraid of him rashly descending upon the East Sea. After all, Qin previously had a black record. In the East Sea Dragon Palace, he had joined hands with the Yardmaster to take away the sword of the East Sea. Of course, another reason was that the Peach Garden had established a stable passageway with this place. Descending here was the easiest and fastest. The dragon girl's expression changed. Her eyes emitted a cold light. Who is it? The next moment, the cold dragon girl's face turned pale. Looking at the person below the hall, she couldn't help but tremble. It's him. It's him. The dragon girl would never forget his appearance. Even if he turned into ashes, she would still be able to recognize him. Qin had come. He had quietly barged into the inner hall and stood in front of me. Who would believe that he didn't mean anything? The dragon girl instantly thought too much. What narrow-minded? What killing a dragon for revenge? All kinds of terrifying thoughts collided in her mind. It's over. It's over. Not to mention that her father wasn't here. Even if he was here, he wouldn't be able to resist Qin. No one could save her today. Thinking of this, the dragon girl burst into tears. Her tears and snot flowed down her face. She looked extremely miserable and heartbroken. Qin was embarrassed. Looking at the weeping and despairing dragon lady, Zhang Xian knew that he had frightened her even if he used his knees to think. As for this, what happened in the past was already in the past. Was there a need for him to bother with a little girl? But thinking about it carefully, he had rashly rushed in, and it really did seem as if he had bad intentions. It was no wonder that the dragon girl was so frightened. Don't cry. As soon as she said this, the dragon girl cried even more fiercely. I'm about to die, and yet you don't allow me to cry? This is going too far. Qin looked up at the skies, but all he could see was endless seawater. He felt even more depressed. He rubbed his temples and said, If you cry again, I'll change my mind and really attack you. The dragon girl sobbed. Her red eyes were wide with tears as she stared at Qin with disbelief. Qin was incomparably annoyed by her gaze. He coldly sneered, What sort of status do I have? Do I need to be sneaky to kill a little girl like you? Hurry up and put on your clothes so you can send me into the East Sea. Chapter 1450. Just as he spoke, Qin felt that something was wrong. The woman in front of him was crying like a pear blossom in the rain, and he had impatiently asked someone to hurry and change her clothes, no matter how he looked at it. He seemed like a scumbag who would fall out at the mere mention of that. They were clearly just looking for someone to lead the way for them. How did things suddenly become so strange and turn out to be like this? As Qin was inwardly annoyed, the dragon lady's first thought was that Qin wanted to harm her father. If this weren't the case, why would he go through so much trouble to come to her place first? He must have been trying to conceal himself. Although I am afraid of death, it is impossible for me to help you harm my father. The dragon lady wiped away her tears, despair rising in her heart. She had seen through Qin plan and refused him, causing him to fly into a rage out of shame. Would there be any good consequences for her? Qin immediately guessed what the dragon lady was thinking. He clenched his teeth and roared, Stop thinking nonsense. If I really wanted to move against the East Sea, I would have done so directly. Why would I need to lie to you? His attitude was extremely vile and revealed his contempt for the East Sea. Dragon Girl was first annoyed, but then she revealed a look of bewilderment, because the truth seemed to be, as Qin said, if he wanted to attack the East Sea, there was no need for him to do so, because even her father would not be able to defeat him. Qin flicked his sleeves and turned around. Put on your clothes. This dragon lady was too outrageous. Even if he was alone in the inner palace, she couldn't be so casual. Not to mention the fact that there was very little fabric on her body and the transparency was superb, but Qin Yu's eyes were also ridiculously sharp. Although it was just a casual glance, he was still able to see what he shouldn't have seen. In particular, the heartbroken dragon lady was crying and grieving, completely ignoring whether or not her dress was in a normal state. In short, it could be said that it was the lightest. After being reminded by Chinyu twice, the dragon lady finally regained her composure. She looked down at herself and blushed. She hurriedly pulled it up, but found that the style of her clothes was so simple that it revealed even more when she pulled it up. She could only hurriedly find another dress to wear outside. Only then did she let out a sigh of relief. Well, because of her sexual orientation, this was the first time Dragon Girl had embarrassed herself in front of the opposite sex. But if the other party was Chinyu, thinking about it, it would be quite exciting. At a time like this, I'm actually thinking about such things. I'm probably crazy, but with this craziness and awkwardness, Dragon Girl finally regained her composure. He hadn't even put on his clothes properly, and Chinyu had specifically reminded him that he wasn't going to kill him, right? Otherwise, there was no need for this at all. Furthermore, he had turned around and did not even look in this direction. No, he had turned around because he had already seen it. As she thought about how her clothes had fallen off just now and how Chinyu had clearly seen her, the dragon lady flushed red. For a time, she forgot to be afraid. Chinyu lightly coughed. He didn't know how things would turn out if he delayed any longer, so he quickly changed the subject. Prepare yourselves, we're going to the East Sea. The dragon girl let out a breath of relief and also felt a bit disappointed. But as she thought about it, the more anxious Chinyu was, the more it meant that he wanted to escape from his current situation. In other words, it wasn't as if he didn't feel anything. For some reason, Dragon Girl suddenly felt her heart calm down when she thought of this. This was probably the reasoning of an unreasonable woman. Her lips curled up, and she bowed to Chinyu. Yes, please wait a moment, Mr. Ninth. Moments later, the carriage set out, heading straight for the East Sea through a transmission array. Within the carriage, Chinyu sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. He was concentrating his mind, and his ears were closed to the outside world. Dragon Girl curled her lips, a playful look in her eyes. Just as Chinyu was about to collapse, they finally arrived at the East Sea. It was a short journey, but to Chinyu, it felt like an eternity. He stood up and pushed open the door. His eyes swept over the people of the Dragon Palace, and he said in a deep voice, "Take me to see the Dragon King." As she watched him leave, Dragon Girl chuckled. She suddenly felt that this Mr. Ninth of the Peach Garden, who had the title of a saint-slaughtering specialist, wasn't that scary after all. Following that, the Dragon Palace was bustling with activity. After sensing Chinyu's aura, the Dragon King nearly fled on spot. Fortunately, he soon discovered that Chinyu had come with Dragon Girl. After hesitating for a long time, he barely mustered the courage to meet Chinyu. Mr. Ninth, it hasn't been long since we parted, but Mr. Ninth's elegance is even greater than in the past. This king truly admires you. Lord Dragon Sage laughed heartily, his tone somewhat friendly and respectful. But Chinyu could still feel the nervousness in his words. Chinyu lightly coughed. He finally recovered from a stimulation brought about by Dragon Girl just now. He secretly felt that his performance was shameful. Even if he hadn't been close to a woman for a long time, cough, 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 it shouldn't be this bad. It must be because of the extra stimulation. After all, that Dragon Girl's sexual orientation wasn't normal, and with that little tail of hers, hiss. Stop, hurry up and stop. If he continued thinking about this, he would be going too far. His father was right in front of him, so he had to be a bit more dignified. Chinyu suppressed these thoughts. His expression didn't change. He said, "Dragon Sage, the reason I came here today is because I have some questions to ask." Hearing this, Dragon Sage relaxed half his heart. This surnamed Chin shouldn't be here to cause trouble. Otherwise, he could have directly started the conversation. But the other half of his heart was still hanging in suspense. After all, who knew what he wanted to ask? If he didn't obtain an answer, or if he wasn't satisfied, he might turn hostile. Cough. May I ask what questions Mr. Ninth has? As long as I know, I will tell you everything I know. If there is anything I don't know, I asked Mr. Ninth to forgive me. Qin Yu guessed his thoughts, but didn't explain. Then I'll have to trouble Dragon Sage. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, I want to know what Dragon Sage's understanding of the spirit of the Great Tao is. Spirit of the Great Tao? Dragon Sage revealed a surprised expression. He looked at Qin Yu, as if he never thought he would ask this question. Qin Yu maintained his composure. He lightly said, Not long ago, I killed a true sage that lost control and came into contact with the spirit of the Great Tao. There are some things I don't understand, so I came here to ask Dragon Sage for guidance. Dragon Sage blurted out, Great Tao backlash. His eyes widened as he stared at Qin Yu. Mr. Ninth, did you encounter a true sage that lost control? Qin Yu nodded. That's right. Then, he briefly explained how the Dark Ruler lost control. Of course, he made some changes so that he wouldn't reveal anything about the Dark World. The identity of the Dark Ruler was the key to entering the desolate region, so he certainly couldn't reveal it. Dragon Sage looked Qin Yu up and down a few times. After confirming that Qin Yu was unscathed and that his aura was extremely strong, his heart was filled with emotions. This Qin Yu was really ridiculously strong. After encountering a true sage that lost control, he was actually unscathed. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed it. As for Qin Yu lying about this matter, he only thought about it for a moment before he was suppressed by Dragon Sage. How bored would he be to do such a thing? Moreover, from what Qin Yu had said, Dragon Sage could confirm that he had personally experienced the incident of a true sage losing control. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so clear about the details. Lightly coughing, Dragon Sage could confirm that Qin Yu had personally experienced the incident of a true sage losing control. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so clear about the details. Hearing this, Qin Yu's eyes lit up. He knew that he had found the right person. He said in a low voice, Everything. I want to know everything about the Great Tao losing control. I hope Dragon Sage can tell me the truth. Dragon Sage nodded, but his heart skipped a beat. If Qin Yu was so anxious to know this, could it be because of him the old dragon of the East Sea was already afraid of Qin Yu? Now that he guessed this possibility, his fear rose to a new level. If it really was as he thought, and Qin Yu lost control in the East Sea, then the entire East Sea bloodline would be completely severed. Thinking of this, Dragon Sage didn't intend to hide anything. He prepared to tell Qin Yu everything he wanted to know. He absolutely couldn't give him the slightest bit of provocation. If that's the case, then this king will have to start from the beginning. Mr. Ninth, please drink some tea. I will first sort things out, lest I make a mistake. Lifting a hand, he drank a cup of tea. Swallowing the scalding hot tea, he forcefully stabilized his mind. Dragon Sage said, Does Mr. Ninth know that the essence of the condensation of the Great Tao is copying? Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He nodded, I know. Dragon Sage nodded. Then it's much simpler. He lifted a hand and rapped the table. His voice subconsciously lowered, revealing a dignified expression. In truth, according to this king's understanding, as the Great Tao condenses, our level of life will transform and we will possess an even greater strength. But at the same time, we will also find ourselves an ancestor that we absolutely cannot provoke. He looked at Qin Yu. Since Mr. Ninth knows that the essence of the condensation of the Great Tao is copying, then you should also be aware that what you and I copy is the world's Great Tao, and what we copy can be considered its shadow. And just what sort of transcendent mystery is the world's Great Tao? Even a shadow has its own consciousness. Thus, this is the ancestor that this king spoke of. In other words, the Great Tao has its own spirit. This explanation was similar to what his eldest senior apprentice brother had said, but it was simpler and clearer. It was clear that Dragon Sage had a deeper understanding of this. Seeing Qin Yu earnestly listening, Dragon Sage knew that his words had obtained approval. He relaxed a little and continued to say, You and I both know that the Great Tao is the foundation of a true saint. Unless there is a critical moment, we will never use it, and we are even more unwilling to allow it to suffer any damage. First of all, the Great Tao is indeed the key to our survival. Any damage to it will cause great harm to our Saint Tao. But apart from this, the most important point is that if the great Tao is damaged, it will cause its spirit to be dissatisfied. It is fine if it is damaged once or twice, and it can be restored through time and careful nurturing. But if it is damaged too much, or if it is damaged too many times, it may cause the spirit of the great Tao to erupt, resulting in a backlash from the great Tao. Qin Yu's eyes lit up. From Dragon Sage's explanation, his understanding of this matter instantly became much clearer. No wonder the Permitha true saints cherish their own great Tao so much. Qin Yu had even secretly mocked them for this. It had to be known that since the great Tao was the strongest method of a true saint, it was naturally the most solid and powerful existence. It was extremely difficult to damage it. The saints seemed to have been too cautious, and it was inevitable that they would cower in fear. Now that he understood the truth, he suddenly realized that the saints weren't just worried about the great Tao being damaged, but they were even more unwilling to stimulate the spirit of the great Tao hidden within. Seeing the uncertainty in Qin Yu's eyes, Dragon Sage cleverly kept his mouth shut. He picked up his teacup and quietly drank his tea, but his eyes constantly swept over Qin Yu, confirming his previous guess. This Qin Yu brat, there really was something wrong with him. Thinking about how he had risen at an astonishing speed in such a short period of time, perhaps he had taken a shortcut, and shortcuts naturally came with a price. The hall fell silent. After a long time, Qin Yu let out a breath and slowly said, "Thank you, Lord Dragon Sage, for dispelling my doubts. I'm truly grateful." Dragon Sage's face was full of smiles. Mr. Ninth is too polite. It's just that I've lived for a long time and have gained some understanding. Even if I didn't say it, Mr. Ninth would have slowly come to understand. Qin Yu didn't say anything more. Instead, he changed the topic. "Dare I ask, Dragon Sage, is there any way to prevent a backlash from the great Tao? Or, to be more direct, is there any way in this world that can remove the hidden dangers of the great Tao's backlash in advance?" Beads of sweat appeared on Dragon Sage's forehead. This king knew that the surname Qin wouldn't be so easily dealt with. He definitely had a trick up his sleeve. And sure enough, although Qin Yu's face was calm, he actually asked a question that was difficult to answer. Over the endless years, there had been countless true saints in the world. Who didn't want to solve the problem of the great Tao's backlash once and for all? After all, no one who could become a true saint would be willing to have an ancestor they couldn't provoke living in their body. How aggrieved was that? But this matter involved the great Tao of the world. So how could it be so simple? If he directly said no, looking at Qin Yu's complexion, he feared he wouldn't give up so easily. Lord Dragon Sage clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "This is a stubborn disease that has plagued us true saints. In this world, I have never heard of anyone who can remove the hidden dangers of the great Tao's backlash. But when I was talking to someone in the past, I heard a saying." He looked at Qin Yu and flicked his sleeves. Space violently shook and twisted, completely sealing off the hall from outside. After sensing for several breaths of time and making sure there weren't any abnormalities, he continued to say, "This person said that the source of the great Tao's backlash comes from the spirit of the great Tao. If its spirituality could be erased and only the pure power of the great Tao is left to control, then the disaster of the great Tao's backlash can be completely cut off." In just a few sentences, Longsheng's forehead was covered in sweat. His complexion was extremely ugly, as if he had fallen seriously ill. A saint could sense the heavens and earth. The great path within their bodies contained the shadow of the great path of heaven and earth. Even if they could distort space and completely isolate the inside from the outside, they might not be able to conceal everything. What if these words were perceived by the great Tao of heaven and earth? Did they really think that this world would not kill? Don't forget that in this world, there existed the most terrifying thing, heaven's punishment. Although it would not descend easily, and ordinary cultivators had never even heard of it, once the heavenly punishment descended, it would not rest until one side was dead. Even if he was at the level of a true nirvana saint, he would probably die under the brutal heavenly punishment. Qin Yu's heart stirred. Looking at Long Sheng across from him, thoughts tumbled in his mind, gradually converging into a strong intuition. What the dragon sage said was probably right. If he wanted to deal with the danger of the backlash from the Grand Tao, then he could only erase the spirit of the Grand Tao, and this spirit was related to the Grand Tao of the heavens and the earth. Erasing the spirit of the Grand Tao was equivalent to going against the heavens. It was foreseeable that this kind of thing would not be permitted by the heavens and earth, and would even be punished horribly. But only this sort of heaven-defying and tyrannical method could completely resolve the hidden dangers. Qin took a deep breath. He cupped his hands together and said, "Thank you, Lord Long Sheng." Seeing that Qin Yu didn't say anything more, Long Sheng let out a deep breath and undid the seal. He forced a smile and said, "Even if it is only a thought, it is best to reduce such matters as much as possible in order to avoid any accidents. This is a reminder from me to Mr. Ninth." Qin Yu nodded. He stood up and said, "I have some other matters that need to be dealt with as soon as possible, so I won't stay in the Dragon Palace any longer. Farewell." He turned and walked away, vanishing from sight with a single step. Looking at the place where Qin Yu vanished, Long Sheng wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and slumped into a chair. He thought that this fellow had better never come back. Chapter 1451. First finding the Dragon Lady and then coming to the East Sea was to make things more convenient and avoid unnecessary trouble. But he didn't think he would have to waste his breath instead. In particular, as he thought about the changes in the Dragon Lady's attitude and the way her lips curved up, Qin Yu couldn't help but feel annoyed. Luckily, his trip to the East Sea had gone smoothly. The old dragon was tactful and had clearly explained the spirit of the Great Tao to Qin Yu, helping him a great deal. Waves tumbled above the blue sea. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. He stepped on the void, his eyes filled with uncertainty. With the East Sea Dragon Saint's words, and comparing it with his elder senior apprentice brother's words, he could confirm his speculations. The source of the hidden dangers had been determined, and there was a high chance he had already obtained the method to solve the problem. This was just saying, but actually doing it wasn't as simple as it seemed. The shadow of the world's great Tao, going against the will of the world, just these 2 points were like 2 mountains pressing down on him, making him tense and finding it hard to breathe. Suddenly, Qin Yu came to a stop. He rubbed his temples and looked at the surrounding sea and sky, a self-deprecating smile on his face. As expected, he was too nervous. As he thought about it, his mind wandered. Just now, the old dragon had already carefully reminded him that although the Dragon Saint was worried that he would be sucked into this, he still owed him a favor and had to give him face, so he shouldn't wander around here any longer. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu lifted a hand and slashed forwards. The void trembled and split open. He stepped in. This involved the world's great Tao. As the Dragon Saint said, even thinking about it might not be safe. If Qin Yu wanted to consider this matter, he had to first find a safe place to hide. He couldn't return to the Peach Garden. If he stirred up trouble, they would all suffer a calamity. Luckily, Qin Yu now had another identity. Moreover, there were many things he could do in that place, and it would be relatively safer. When he stepped in, he was in the East Sea. When he stepped out, he appeared in an endless darkness. The nothingness beyond. Just as he stepped in, Qin Yu's eyebrows rose up, a bit of surprise in his eyes. He looked up ahead. This place was close to the East Sea small world and wasn't their usual route of activity. He never thought his luck would be so good that he would bump into a world void creature. Wait a minute. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He had come into contact with them before and had personally killed a few of them. Hence, he had some understanding of world void creatures. For example, these strange creatures that lived in the void world and wandered in the eternal darkness seemed to have formed a piece of chaos within their bodies. Perhaps he could try to make use of this. After all, according to common sense, even if the world had its own will, the focus of that will should be mostly focused on the various small worlds. It shouldn't care too much about the outer world which was practically a forbidden zone for living beings. Before, Qin wanted to go to the dark world, but now he had a new decision. His body moved, but he did not leave. Instead, he flew towards the world void creature. Very soon, the two parties met, and the appearance of world virtual creatures appeared before their eyes. They looked like giant octopuses that lived in the deep sea. Countless thick tentacles streaked across the darkness silently, propelling their bodies forward at an astonishing speed. The best way to judge a void creature's strength was its size. The one in front of him was even stronger than the ones Qin had killed before. According to common sense, the stronger a world void creature was, the more likely it was to hide in the depths of the outer world. It was unknown what it was thinking, but it had run so close to the East Sea. But that didn't matter. Moreover, in this situation, the stronger this world void creature was, the more useful it would be. Perhaps it felt the remnant aura of Qin Yu's body from killing the world void creatures before. With an angry roar, the void creature in front of it opened its mouth and swallowed. A powerful swallowing strength erupted, covering Qin Yu within. At the same time, several thick tentacles howled as they broke through the darkness. But unexpectedly, this extremely powerful cultivator wasn't able to resist at all. He was directly swallowed into its stomach. As a result, the tentacles that had shot out could only fall powerlessly into thin air. Its body paused for a moment as if it was hesitating. However, it was already in its stomach. After a moment of hesitation, this enormous world virtual creature slid its tentacles silently and disappeared into the depths of the void beyond the world virtual. At this time, within the body of this world void creature, Qin Yu swept his eyes around, a look of amazement on his face. With his current experience, it wouldn't be too much to say that it was extraordinary. He could naturally see many different things in this muddled world. Within the body of a world void creature, it was nearly a world of its own. Of course, this world was still in an extremely chaotic state, but the layout had already been formed. Of course, that was all. Even if there was a layout of a world, wanting to smoothly evolve it and finally form a world was an extremely difficult matter. Although the realm void creature was strong, its strength was much weaker compared to this. At this time, Qin Yu suddenly frowned. He thought of a possibility. The layout had already been formed. All that was missing was strength. Then, in the boundless and endless outer world void, could there really be a world void creature that was countless times more tyrannical than this one? If it really did exist, then with its tyrannical strength, it might be possible for it to support the evolution of the inner world. Once it surpassed a certain limit, a true world would be born. A long time ago, after coming into contact with the existence of the outer world void, Qin Yu had some thoughts. For instance, just how did the star-sift islands and the small worlds within Vastyong appear? Of course, there were always rumors of creation in the world. It was said that a supreme existence had created all living beings in the world. Perhaps this was true, or perhaps it was false. But up until now, no one had truly come into contact with the legendary creation. As for the Vastyong world, it was constantly changing. Or, it was more accurate to say that because of various reasons, the number of small worlds had decreased. But on the whole, the number of small worlds was constantly increasing. Was creation still secretly modifying the worlds that it had created? Or perhaps there were countless worlds being bred bit by bit, waiting for the day when they would transform and finally condense? World void creatures. Could they be the source of the birth of small worlds? This was truly an incomparably shocking thought. If this was true, then the secrets hidden in the outer world void were likely far greater than what the world knew. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the shaking emotions in his heart. With his powerful self-control, he forced himself to remain calm. This sort of great secret clearly wasn't something that could be unraveled in a short period of time. Right now, it was best for him to restrain his thoughts and focus on himself first. After all, there were matters of priority. As for how the world came to be, Qin Yu did want to know. But he wasn't in a rush to know. But there was one thing he definitely didn't want to see. That was how he would suffer a backlash from the great Tao and die a miserable death. Returning to the main topic, Qin Yu discovered that the situation was better than he imagined. Within the body of this world-void creature, there was the outline of a world, and it was in an extremely chaotic state. This caused the aura here to be incomparably chaotic, making it difficult to lock onto or sense. Of course, this sort of chaos itself was a powerful digestive ability. If it wasn't confident in itself, the world-void creature wouldn't have dared to open its mouth and swallow it. If an ordinary cultivator were to be swallowed into its stomach, they would only be able to last for a short period of time before they were crushed to pieces and thoroughly absorbed. But with Qin Yu's cultivation, he naturally wouldn't end up in such a miserable state. While he might not be able to relax at home, it wasn't difficult for him to protect himself. Stone Pagoda. With a loud shout, a sharp light exploded in the depths of Qin Yu's eyes. That's right, in regards to how to deal with the shadow of the world hidden within his own great Tao. After determining the feasibility of this, the first thing Qin Yu thought of was this stone pagoda that had an excellent appetite and seemed to have eaten many things before. And in the past, Qin Yu had personally witnessed and even experienced its incomparably mystical and powerful swallowing methods. The stone pagoda phantom appeared. It circled around as if it were observing the situation within the world-void creature's body. Its voice was filled with praise. There is actually the elementary form of a world hidden within the body of a world-void creature. Only Master is skilled and bold enough to allow himself to be swallowed into its stomach on his own initiative. Only then would you be able to discover this secret. The origin of the world's condensation is likely here. Following at Master's side, it is truly easy to broaden my horizons. As Qin Yu listened to the stone pagoda's flattering words, and yet it wasn't willing to talk about proper business, a smile flashed in his eyes. The more it tried to shirk responsibility, the more it proved that the stone pagoda really did have the ability to accomplish this. Otherwise, it could have just honestly said that it couldn't do it. There would have been no need to go through so much trouble. All right, there will be plenty of time to flatter others in the future. This place isn't necessarily safe, so let's talk about proper business first. After Qin Yu pointed things out, the stone pagoda was immediately forced into a corner. There was no way to retreat any further. Moreover, Qin Yu's faintly smiling eyes were filled with a threatening intent. It was clear he was saying that if the stone pagoda continued to play the fool, he wouldn't be polite anymore. The stone pagoda bitterly smiled and said, "I certainly understand Master's meaning, but this matter involves the great Tao of the heavens and earth. Even if I had 10,000 times more courage, I still wouldn't dare to open my mouth and swallow it. Moreover, the chances of success are far too small. Even if I were lucky enough to succeed, Master should also know the consequences of eating random things. I still want to follow Master and help you plan and do my best. I don't want to be forcefully smashed to pieces by the thunder tribulation that falls from the heavens." The stone pagoda paused for a moment and looked at Qin Yu. It continued to say, "Moreover, my aura is one with Master's, and there is no way for me to completely separate myself. If I am unlucky enough to die under the thunder tribulation, that is fine. But if I drag Master into facing the tribulation together with me, then I really won't hesitate to die 1,000 deaths." Qin Yu's lips twitched. He thought that this stone pagoda was becoming more and more eloquent. But he had to admit that this was the truth. If he rashly attacked, he might be able to force the stone pagoda to swallow the spirit of the great Tao. But the troubles afterwards wouldn't be easy to deal with. Cough! Qin Yu suddenly remembered that he still had a great secret on his body. That was the little blue lamp that had disappeared without a trace and hadn't moved for a long time. For some unknown reason, the little blue lamp had fallen into a nearly completely silent state. But the connection between it and Qin Yu still existed. And this fellow, the little blue lamp, seemed to have a very serious problem with this part of the world. A long, long time ago, when Qin Yu was still incomparably weak, he had already sensed this and personally experienced it. The reason that similar horrifying events hadn't occurred again was because Qin Yu's cultivation had risen at an astonishing speed, and his ability to conceal his aura had become much stronger. And the little blue lamp had explained the profound in simple terms and had almost never interfered in matters around Qin Yu again. Otherwise, Qin Yu's intuition told him that he wouldn't have been able to live so peacefully. There must have been some great accident. In today's matter, if the stone pagoda swallowed the spirit and really drew heavenly tribulation, then Qin Yu would be implicated. That might expose the existence of the little blue lamp. Thinking of this, Qin Yu's heart shrank, and an instinctive fear rose up in his heart. In the blink of an eye, beads of sweat began to cover his forehead. This was a cultivator's instinctive sense of danger. The higher one's cultivation, the clearer one's perception would be. And it had been a long time since Qin Yu had felt such despair and fear. It could also be understood that if something really did happen, he would be in extreme danger. He might even fall into a hopeless situation where he would die. Qin Yu took a deep breath and slowly suppressed the trembling fear in his heart. He bitterly smiled. He discovered that he had been shaken by the matter of the spirit of the great Tao. While he was feeling fear and shock, there had been some problems with his thinking, and he hadn't thought of this ahead of time. Luckily, the stone pagoda was afraid of death and had inadvertently reminded Qin Yu. If it had been like the eye of eternal night and been foolishly loyal, then it would have acted without hesitation after receiving orders. That would have been truly troublesome. Sensing the change in Qin Yu's mood, the stone pagoda felt a little more at ease. It was truly afraid of its master. This was the type of person that dared to do anything. The spirit of the great Tao of the heavens and earth. Could something on this level be touched just because they wanted to? No, it was more accurate to say that just thinking about this was already a heresy. Otherwise, did the true saints really think that after so many years passed, how could they not have thought of this? The reason why no one had truly tried to do so until now was because of fear. The stronger one was the more they could clearly sense just how small and insignificant they were compared to the heavens and earth, how they couldn't even withstand a single blow. This was also because Qin Yu had risen up like a rocket, and he was strong and had many methods at his disposal. It was only because of this that he was incomparably weak and in awe. Luckily, after Qin Yu's reminder, he finally woke up. Indeed, when it came to important matters, he still needed someone like me who was mature and prudent, someone who could consider the overall situation. If everyone relied on Qin Yu, there would definitely be a major problem. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows, and the bitter smile on his lips deepened. Now, even though he knew that the problem already existed and he had found a solution, he still didn't dare to do anything. Could it be that he could only watch helplessly on as his great Tao slowly turned into a poisonous snake that turned around to bite him? This was truly a depressing matter that made one feel extremely aggrieved and helpless. The stone pagoda thought for a moment and lightly coughed. It put forward its own opinion. Master, the great Tao is still stable right now. Whether there's a problem or not, it is not good to just listen to his side of the story. After all, your situation is different from others. Perhaps your great Tao is also different? These words were vague, but there seemed to be a deeper meaning behind them. Chapter 1452. Qin Yu glanced at it and frowned. What do you want to say? The stone pagoda respectfully said, Master, I want to remind you that in this world, even if you see it with your own eyes, it might not necessarily be true. But it is better than listening to the words of others. He paused for a moment. For instance, regarding the spirit of the great Tao, even if this is the truth, it is still unknown whether or not there has been an accident. Why don't you confirm it first and then decide what to do next? Qin Yu rubbed between his eyebrows. I have carefully sensed it many times and haven't sensed any abnormalities in the great Tao. So how can I confirm it? The stone pagoda said, Master is worried that the great Tao has changed because of the matter of breaking the Tao. Since this might be the cause, then how about we try breaking it again? Qin Yu's fingers paused. He coldly glared at the stone pagoda phantom, annoyed at what kind of bullshit suggestion this was. Although manifesting the Tao wasn't difficult for Qin Yu right now, it still didn't feel good. In particular, after confirming that the Great Tao had a spirit, breaking the Tao would stimulate the Great Tao to lose control and cause a backlash. Was this something he could casually try? Just as he was about to berate the stone pagoda, he hesitated. This stone pagoda fellow was incomparably smart. So how could it make such a stupid suggestion? Qin Yu glanced at it, his thoughts racing. He vaguely felt as if he had grasped something. He thought for a moment and said, "Are you reminding me that I can borrow an external force to resolve the hidden dangers of the Great Tao backlash?" And beside him, there were only two parties that could deal with this matter. That woman and that mysterious existence hidden in space-time. Seeing Qin Yu change his mind, the stone pagoda nodded. "Master, I believe that this is the most suitable opportunity." After a brief pause, it continued. "In the world of darkness, when you faced the darkness ruler's loss of control and were preparing to summon his excellency ruler, he suddenly helped you. Although he used the excuse of occasionally showing kindness, Master should be well aware that everything in the world has a reason. Although we don't know what he was thinking, he helped you, and that is the key point. As for what price to pay for this matter, that will depend on Master's own consideration. Looking at the current situation, he might not make too excessive a request." Qin Yu said, "Even so, I can't take the risk. He did help me once, but he may not help me a second time." "Indeed. That's why we still have Her Excellency as a backup," the stone tower said slowly. "Now that everything is ready, I believe it won't be long before Master enters the wastelands to complete the mission Her Excellency gave him. At this juncture, she won't let anything happen to you. He is willing to help you for unknown reasons, and he is valued by the Lord Ruler. This is a double guarantee, which is why I said that this is the most suitable opportunity." Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He completely understood the meaning of the stone tower. Since he had discovered the hidden dangers of the Great Tao and was powerless to solve them, then the best choice was to use external forces to solve them. This fellow was truly astute. He was actually able to think of these things. Qin Yu already acknowledged his judgment in his heart. Since there would be a problem sooner or later, it was better to deal with it as soon as possible. Otherwise, if the situation changed in the future, things would become really troublesome. However, shattering one's Tao wasn't a minor matter. Although Qin Yu could casually ask the Sword of the EC to slash out at the barren mountains and plains to achieve this goal, it wasn't a simple matter. But the terrifying power obtained from shattering the Great Tao once was wasted just like that. It was really a waste. At this moment, Qin Yu had a headache. What kind of opponent should he find for this sword? He also remembered that he still owed him a divine path soul. There wasn't much time left, so it was better to finish it as soon as possible. Oh, why don't I use this sword to complete this transaction? Although using it to kill a true sage felt like using a large knife to kill an ant, at least I would gain something. Who should I kill? The true sages in the vast Yang world had accumulated over the long years. Although they rarely appeared, there were still some of them. But thinking about it carefully, most of those who had a grudge against Qin Yu died on the spot. He couldn't find a suitable target for the time being. Although the thought of killing the innocent flashed through his mind, it was best not to do it. There were so many people in the world who deserved to die. Why should he harm the innocent? After thinking about it a few times, Qin Yu had a rough idea of what to do. Right now, he had two choices. The first was the dark world. In terms of hatred, Qin Yu really had a lot of them. He wouldn't feel the slightest bit guilty if he killed one or two darkness true sages. The first one that came to his mind was the dark world. However, it was quickly eliminated by Qin Yu. He had killed the master of darkness and was preparing to play a trick. Now that he had entered the great desolate world, it was best to keep quiet in order to avoid unnecessary trouble. As such, there was only the second choice, the Order of Dusk. The Order of Dusk was a top-notch choice. The crisis that Peach Garden faced that day was caused by this force. Peach Blossom Garden hadn't been destroyed. Rather, because of Qin Yu's intervention, it had been revitalized and flourished with vitality. Now, they had two true saints and were far more glorious and majestic than they had been in the past. Their own information channels had also been restored, so they naturally noticed some traces. It was only natural for them to learn of this name. Furthermore, according to Bifone, what happened in the Heavenly Sword sect seemed to have something to do with the Order of Dusk. The people of the Order of Dusk had almost destroyed Peach Garden and killed Peach and the others. They were also suspected to have set up a trap in the Heavenly Sword sect to kill Chinyu. These reasons were very sufficient, and it was natural for them to kill their people. The only thing to be wary of was that the Order of Dusk could gather many true sages to order around. There seemed to be a master behind it. Killing true sages was a relatively simple matter for Chinyu. Even if there were many powerhouses of the Order of Dusk, he didn't need to fight them at the same time. But if the master took action, things would become troublesome. No matter how confident Chinyu was, he didn't think that he had the qualifications to challenge the master. But soon his eyes brightened. Since he had made up his mind to use external forces to solve the hidden dangers of the Great Tao Backlash, he would have to find someone. Since that was the case, he might as well act at once and eliminate all the troubles. Otherwise, if Chinyu entered the desolate region in the future and the Order of Dusk moved against Peach Garden, it would be a great hidden danger. Thinking of this, Chinyu smiled. He felt that targeting the Order of Dusk as his target was an excellent choice. Since he had a direction, what he needed to do next was to return to Peach Garden and ask by phone for more detailed information on the Order of Dusk. He had only heard a few words from her before. With a decision in his heart, Chinyu didn't delay any further. He lifted his foot and stomped down. In the void outside, an incomparably massive world void creature with an astonishing aura was curled up in pain, its mouth emitting mournful wails. This matter has reminded us once again that we can't eat anything we want, otherwise there will be problems. Suddenly, this world void creature opened its mouth and spat out a cloud of turbid fog. Chinyu stepped out from it. After expelling the foreign object in its stomach, the pain disappeared. This world void creature looked at Chinyu with a hint of fear and then turned to flee. Chinyu didn't stop it. After all, this world void creature's body had already produced the layout of a world. Killing it might draw attention. What he was doing now was to avoid being discovered by the heavens and earth, so it was better to avoid trouble. Chinyu focused his mind and then turned to leave. His speed was astonishing, and he soon arrived outside a small world. With a wave of his hand, he tore open a crack and stepped inside. Without pausing, Chinyu summoned the Peach Garden's portal the moment he stepped into this small world. He pushed it open and disappeared from sight. The trip to the EC had crossed dimensions at an astonishing speed. Chinyu had also spent a long time in the stomach of a world void creature, but he had only spent half a day. This was the privilege of powerhouses. To them, although the infinite heavens and myriad worlds weren't their own backyard, they could freely wander in and out. Just this point alone was something that countless ordinary living beings in this world envied. It had to be known that many living beings had never left their homeland since they were born, nor did they know that there was another world beyond this one. The so-called boundless world required one to be strong enough to truly experience it. Otherwise, one could only be trapped in a well and look up at the tiny little hole in the well to see the splendor of this world. Let's get back to the main topic. After stepping out of the portal, Chinyu didn't pause at all. He raced straight towards where Bifone was. He had signed a contract with her, and there was only half a month left. There really wasn't much time left, so even if he had a target to kill, he still needed to hurry up. Seeing Chinyu take the initiative to visit, Bifone was overjoyed. But before he could say a single word, he was already beaten to it. This is extremely urgent. Third senior apprentice brother, give me detailed information on the Dusk Order. I need it now. Bifone was startled. He glanced at Chinyu's complexion, nodded, and left. Soon, he returned and handed a jade slip to Chinyu. I just made a copy. Everything I know about the garden is in there. Chinyu cupped his hands together. Thank you, third senior apprentice brother. After taking the jade slip, he turned and left, his speed astonishing. He vanished like a gust of wind. Bai Feng's eyes widened. He thought that this was burning the bridge after crossing the river. When he needed her, he ran over, but after he was done, he turned and left. This change in attitude was truly fast. But it seemed that the matter of the great Tao being broken and condensed again really did involve some secrets. Otherwise, little junior apprentice brother wouldn't have refused to tell her. But curiosity was something that wasn't easy to deal with. And beneath Bai Feng's calm and gentle exterior, this curiosity was especially strong. Thus, although he understood, he still felt tormented in his heart. Thus, Bai Feng looked at the place where Qin Yu disappeared with a bitter smile. He couldn't help but rub his chest, feeling that it was even more blocked. Not to mention that it involved the furnace, which Qin Yu couldn't say. But even if he could, he didn't have the time right now. After obtaining the information about the Dusk Order, Qin Yu probed it with his divine sense and quickly read through it in detail. To be honest, the content of the information was much less than Qin Yu had imagined. As a first-rate holy land, the Peach Garden's information channels were naturally powerful, but they could only gather this much information. It was clear that the other party was extremely careful. Fortunately, it wasn't as if he had gained nothing. For example, the Jade Slip recorded information about a certain member of the Dusk Order. Flood Dragon Sage. Qin Yu silently muttered the other party's name. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Then, my first target will be you. Flood Dragon Sage. The names of this world were a bit mysterious and vague. They sounded incomparably powerful, but also confusing. But most of them were simple and unadorned. For example, the old dragon of the East Sea Dragon Sage. From his name, one could tell who he was. The same was true for Flood Dragon Sage. Strictly speaking, he had some blood relations with the old dragon of the East Sea. The reason why flood dragons couldn't be called dragons directly was because their bloodline was mixed. They didn't have a complete and pure true dragon bloodline. Most flood dragons in this world naturally couldn't be compared to true dragons. The difference between the two was too great. They weren't on the same level at all. However, there are no real laws in this world. There are always all kinds of accidents and special cases. Flood dragons are no exception. For example, the holy flood dragon that we're talking about is an anomaly among the flood dragons. As mentioned before, the Dragon Sage and Flood Dragon Sage had some blood relations. One reason was because the Dragon Sage had an extremely high seniority and was extremely old. Most of the dragon races in the vast Yang world were related to him. The second reason was that the dragon race had a relatively strong reproductive ability. They liked to try all kinds of stimuli, so they had many partners. This caused the flood dragons to have strange appearances and be different from each other. This flood dragon sage's mother was an expert of the dragon race. His father also had a powerful background. He was an ancient beast, the armored gold crystal beast. Although the descendants of the two had mixed bloodlines, they produced some kind of strange fusion. This caused Flood Dragon Sage to be born with great strength and astonishing cultivation talent. Because of this, he was able to achieve the great Tao of true divine. He was one of the most famous experts in this world. In particular, he inherited his father's bloodline and had an astonishingly tyrannical body. To this day, very few people knew that Flood Dragon Sage had secretly joined the Dusk Order and become one of them. But unfortunately, the Peach Garden had enough tentacles. Through clues, they finally confirmed this matter. That was why Qin Yu had appeared outside the dragon's sealing abyss. Flood dragons were also called mixed dragons. Of course, this wasn't a good thing. Most of the dragon race didn't value these descendants. In fact, they looked down on them. As a result, although flood dragons had the bloodline of the dragon race, they didn't have a close relationship with the dragon race. In fact, their relationship was tense. As the head of the flood dragons, this was even more so for Flood Dragon Sage. It was said that in his early years, he had fought with the East Sea Dragon Sage in an attempt to seize control of the dragon race and completely change the status between dragons and flood dragons. This attempt ended in failure, but Flood Dragon Sage was able to escape unscathed. This had already proved his strength. Chinyu looked at the huge stone tablet beside the deep stream. The words "Dragon Sealing Abyss" were dripping with blood and filled with killing intent. A smile appeared on his face. He thought that it was fortunate that Flood Dragon Sage and the dragon race of EC were like fire and water. Otherwise, he had just received a favor from that old dragon, and it wouldn't be good for him to kill half of his race. But thinking about it carefully, given the current situation and the fact that time was so tight, there probably wasn't any other choice. So even if Flood Dragon Sage really did recognize him as a relative, Chinyu would most likely still kill him. Cough, cough. As expected, the one who couldn't be deceived was himself. Moreover, no one could avoid hypocrisy in order to seek peace of mind. Shaking his head, Chinyu suppressed the mockery in his heart. He took a step forward. His body instantly soared into the air, and his entire body fell down like a boulder. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.